One day, a team of adventurers managed to wound the strongest monster during a battle. That monster was a demon lord, and it finally retreated after suffering severe wounds. Warrior Goblin, being one of the members of the group of heroes, was very happy that he and his team managed to seriously wound the demon lord. And hero Eric, being Goblin's comrade who still hadn't recovered from the battle, swept up that the demon lord wouldn't be able to attack for a while. What Goblin was most excited about was that he and his comrades would finally be able to return to their families. At that moment, the guy turned to his fellow mage named Lak. Lak sat not far from the severed paw of the demon lord and pondered. He thought about the fact that he could turn the limb of the lord into magic dust, but there was another question. Would Lak be able to do that without destroying her main body? Looking at the infatuated Lak, Goblin and Eric sighed heavily and realized that the situation was once again repeating itself. At that moment, Lak remembered that Goblin had approached him and turned around and asked the one what he wanted. Goblin smiled and observed that even though their team had managed to chase away the demon lord, Lak was still infatuated with his hand. Goblin thought that was why Lak still didn't have a girlfriend. Lak looked at his comrade in bewilderment and asked him a question: how could the demon lord's hand help in getting a girlfriend? This silly question of Lak's made Goblin and Eric look at each other and smile. In the end, Goblin laughed and remarked that at this rate, Lak would be alone for a long time. This is where Lak got the feeling that he was just being slandered for no reason. In the end, Goblin felt that it was time to go home and say goodbye to this depressing interdimensional rift. Lastly, Goblin decided to say something to his comrade Lak. He turned around and winked at Lak and talked about how nice it was to have a family at home waiting for you. After all, both Goblin and Eric were only able to fight because of the support of their families. Therefore, it would be great if Lak had a family like that too. To which Lak replied that Goblin and Eric are his family. These three guys are a group consisting of hero Eric, warrior Goblin, and mage Lak. And the three of them fought against a demon lord from another dimension. Eventually, they managed to chase him back into the interdimensional rift. But when it was time to return, Lak suddenly froze in his place. Goblin and Eric turned around in bewilderment and looked at their comrade. As it turned out, Lak was standing there for a reason. He had heard a great demon army advancing towards his team, which was able to catch up with them. Then the guys started to bare their swords again, preparing for another difficult battle. Their strength was running out. Lak realized that his team was seriously wounded, and if they continued to fight, they would be destroyed. Still, the guys can't let hero Eric die because the demon lord is still alive. When the demon lord recovers, the guys will need the hero's power. That's why Lak has decided that he will stay. Standing up for his comrades, with a smirk on his face, he ordered them to leave it to him and leave. Of course, Eric and Goblin were against such a statement. They were not going to leave their comrade in distress and asked Lak not to talk nonsense. But Lak reminded the boys that their children were waiting for them at home. Also, Lak assured that everything was fine and he would surely catch up with his comrades as soon as he could. Then Eric and Goblin were confused but still made the decision to leave. Goblin left his comrade with tears in his eyes, and Eric only turned around and mentally asked Lak not to die. Then Lak was left alone with the demon army, but he continued to have a wry smile on his face. Without a drop of doubt or fear in his eyes, Lak ordered the monsters to attack, unwilling to just let them pass. Finally, Lak attacked the vile creatures with his magic, wanting to protect both of his comrades. Using magic, Lak was able to deal well with all the monsters without getting injured. At one point, Lak counted 50 monsters killed, but the number was increasing. At some point, the young man simply stopped keeping score. He didn't know how many monsters he had already managed to defeat. The corpses of the demons turned into magic like a thick fog and then disappeared. Lak wondered how much time had passed since he had parted ways with his comrades Goblin and Eric. He had lost track of time. The core of the demon army never shrank, and soon Lak realized his limits. And suddenly there was a turning point for them. A top-class demon called Demon Commander appeared in Lak's path. The monster managed to grab Lak by the neck and lift him above the ground. Lak did nothing, and the demon continued to squeeze his neck with its nasty paws with long claws. Lak felt his life force being drawn out. This was a top-class magic that only high-ranking demons could use, and Lak knew it. Life transfer, exhausting touch. This was the magic that the demon used. Finally, it let go of Lak, and the young man slumped to the ground. Lak could feel his remaining mana and almost all of his life force being drained. The young man assumed that the demon had changed its approach, deciding that it could not overpower with physical attacks. However, now it was Lak's turn to use this magic, since he had just completed his training. That was why after rising to his feet, without wasting any time, Lak touched the demon with his hand and started the life transfer. Exhausting touch. Lack was very sorry, but he was capable of learning any magic that was used on him. And the life transfer, the desiccating touch, is the technique that allows him to replenish mana and restore health at the same time. Then what's left of the demon commander is only his sword, which allows mana to flow magnificently. After defeating the demon commander, Lack picked up his sword and prepared to fight the remaining monsters. The young man was not afraid now, for he was confident that he could fight for years. It was nighttime in the city at this time, and only a few windows still had bright lights on. In one of these windows was a little girl. She was looking anxiously into the darkness in which nothing could be seen. At that moment, her mother came to her and told her that she was going to put out the light, which is why the little girl should go to bed. The little girl then decided to share her anxiety with her mom. She told her that she felt that there might be monsters tonight. The mom believed her daughter. She only reminded the girl that the country is protected by a great sage. That is why the inhabitants will be all right. Eventually, the mother calmed her daughter named Solaris and asked her to go to bed. But it was not only Solaris who was restless. It is worth mentioning a character that the reader will get to know a little later. It's a guy. That night he had his rooster by his side as usual. It was this pet that was as anxious as Solaris. The young man noticed that his pet was worried about something and asked him what was the matter. And the rooster, whose name is Herberg, could only crow pitifully and try to explain something to his master. There is one more hero, with which the reader gets better acquainted earlier. It is a girl with ears and a tail. Being a beastman, on that unfortunate night she was also extremely disturbed, but did not yet realize what was wrong. Lack at this time only felt that he had been fighting for a very long time. A few hours. No, it might even have been a few months. That was something Lack didn't know. He could only speculate, for he had long since lost his sense of time. If he wanted to sleep, the young man would cast a spell on himself called Marionette. This spell originally belonged to black magic used to manipulate enemies. Using it, Lack would be able to continue fighting even in his sleep, making his own body mobile. Then Lack had virtually lost all human emotion. Ironically, the one who gave Lack his emotions back was the demon lord himself. He reappeared suddenly and practically out of nowhere. Lack had to fight the demon lord again, but alone, without his comrades. The demon lord did not hesitate long and attacked Lack with his powerful sword, striking the ground. The sword strike was so powerful that the demon lord was sure that his opponent was dead. But what was the monster's surprise when the smoke cleared and Lack appeared through it, being alive and unharmed. Without thinking long and with a smile on his face, Lack rushed to attack, unexpectedly. But the young man had already learned how to fight against high-class demons in this interdimensional rift. The first thing Lack planned to do was to switch to melee combat and prevent the demon from using fire magic. Then, once behind the demon lord's back, Lack used a life transmission. Exhausting touch. But no sooner had Lack finished what he had started than the demon lord used a barrier, driving Lack away. The demon managed to not only block Lack's attack, but also wounded the young man in the stomach. Lack fell on his back, and the demon did not miss a good chance to finish the young man. Swinging his sword, the demon lord was already ready to destroy Lack once and for all. But Luck had already managed to repel the demon lord's blow with his sword, which he had inherited from the demon commander. Unfortunately, the lord's blow was so strong that the commander's sword was simply broken. It was then that Lack realized that even if he poured a large amount of mana into the demon commander's sword, it was still no match for the demon lord's cursed sword. But Lack did not despair, and looking at the happy face of the demon lord, asked him not to be happy because he managed to break his sword, because after all, Lack is a mage. That's why, without thinking long, Lack attacked the demon lord using the fire dungeon. But that wasn't all. When the demon lord was distracted, Lack was determined to make a final strike. Taking advantage of the moment, he once again used the life transmission. Exhausting touch. The process was underway. Lack immediately felt how hard it was to suck the life out of a demon lord. While the demon lord was burning in his own fiery dungeon, Lack continued to use the drying touch. All the powers of the demon lord's magic barrier were focused on defending against the fiery dungeon. In other words, the drying touch could pass through the barrier unhindered. That was why Lack decided to give the demon lord a choice. Either he would burn in Lack's flames, or Lack would suck him dry of all his life force. Finally, it was all over. The smoke cleared, and on the surface, stuck in the ground, was only the demon lord's sword. Suddenly, Luck's hand appeared from the ground. The young man began to climb to the surface. Seeing the demon lord's sword, Lack concluded that he had won. The young man's happiness brought tears to his eyes. He was too happy, for he had single-handedly managed to protect the heroes in the world. After jumping around on the spot for a while, Lack got a little cold. Only then did he realize that his clothes had been destroyed. But after looking at the demon lord's sword again, the young man felt that he could sell this piece of metal since he had lost all his money and clothes. Of course, if selling this cursed sword at all would be possible. In the end, Luck wondered, how long had he been fighting in the interdimensional rift? Was it really a few months, or perhaps a year or even more? After some time, finally, Luck returned to his world. The first thing the young man did was try to figure out where he was. After finding the main road, Luck decided that he would figure it out if he kept following it. As time passed, Luck stumbled upon the royal capital. Looking at it, the young man even wondered if it was definitely the royal capital, because the atmosphere was different from what he remembered. Luck just couldn't understand when the inhabitants had time to build all this. Luck walked toward the entrance of the capital with a confident stride, but he couldn't avoid attracting attention. Being stripped almost naked and holding the huge sword of the demon lord, Luck confidently walked past the royal guards. Of course, the guards couldn't turn a blind eye to such a suspicious person. When they saw Luck, their eyes went wide open. That was why they were forced to stop him. Luck reluctantly stopped and asked the guard what was wrong. But the guard, on the other hand, thought that this question should be asked by Luck's tone, not the other way around. The first thing these kingdom defenders were concerned about was why was Luck naked. Luck decided to tell the guards the truth, because he said that he had gone through a brutal battle in the interdimensional rift and lost all his belongings, including his bag and adventurer card. After making such a statement, the two guards looked at each other, after which, one of them approached Luck and with a serious face suggested that he had just met some brigands. It is worth noting that the guard called Luck a boy. Luck, of course, was dumbfounded. In the first place, he did not understand why the guard was treating him as a boy. In the second place, he tried again to explain to the guard that he had indeed been in a fierce battle, and the brigands had nothing to do with it. The guards, on the other hand, simply refused to believe anything Luck said. They were just sure of their guesses and that Luck, at his age, just wanted to seem tough. The guards also decided to cheer Luck up, noting that at least he had survived, if only by luck. Luck looked at the guards and realized that they would not believe him anyway, and the guards continued to cheer him on in every way possible. Finally, Luck got tired of explaining anything to these guys and told them that he would try to be more careful from now on. Then the guards asked the young man if he had any papers to prove his identity. Luck explained that he had lost all his papers. The guards then assumed that Luck's papers had also been taken by some robbers along with his wallet. In that case, the boys decided to make Luck's papers temporary, therefore they asked him what his name was. Luck introduced himself, proudly giving his name. Hearing this name, the guard was surprised at first, but then he looked at his comrade and smiled. Luck, on the other hand, looked at the two of them and did not understand why they were smiling. Is Luck a bad name? Eventually, Luck was still allowed into the royal capital and was given some clothes. To Luck's surprise, the guards were kind and he thought the country seemed pretty peaceful. Suddenly, an idea popped into Luck's head. He decided to first see his comrades Goblin and Eric, and then go to the guild. Without thinking, Luck went to a random old woman and asked her if she knew where Goblin's house was. The old woman turned out to be a polite woman and took Luck to Goblin's house. Upon seeing Goblin's huge mansion, Luck was simply dumbfounded. When the young man arrived at the door of the mansion, an important butler met him there and asked Luck what business he was on. Luck explained that he wanted to see Goblin and asked the butler if his friend was home. The butler then asked Luck if he had an appointment to see Goblin. Luck replied that they had no appointment, but if he told the head that Luck was here, he would understand. No sooner had the young man explained than the butler stated that he would not let Luck through without an appointment because there were many such people coming. Luck tried to explain something to the butler, but the butler flatly refused to let the strange guy in. In the end, Luck asked the butler to memorize his words and said that he would be back soon. And the butler lastly asked Luck not to come back here again. Leaving Goblin's house, the angry Luck realized that if he were the butler, he too would not let in a guy dressed as he was now, and even with a sword. In that case, Luck decided to just buy new clothes and return to Goblin's house, but first the young man planned to recover his adventurer's card. Suddenly, Luck came across a certain statue. Looking at it, the young man realized that this sculpture had not been here before. That was why Luck wondered, when did they have time to put it up? Looking at the statue, Luck quickly concluded that the sculpture was a mage, and a rather handsome one at that. Then, wanting to know who the statue was in honor of, Luck turned to a random passerby again and, after apologizing, asked a question. The man whom Luck had approached was quite surprised that Luck did not know who the statue was in honor of. He then ran his eyes over Luck and concluded that the young man was just a redneck who had not heard of this great man. Then finally the man explained to Luck that this statue was built in honor of the hero Luck. This is when Lack was at a loss for words. He was dumbfounded and decided to ask the man if he had heard his name correctly, and the man assured him that a redneck should know the name. After all, this is the great hero who sacrificed himself 10 years ago to hold off an army of demons. It was then that realization came to Luck. He looked at the statue again in amazement and realized that it was him. The first thing that confused Luck was that he was not as handsome as the sculpture portrayed him. With these shouts, he pounced on the very man who had explained everything to him, and the passerby in turn asked Lack not to speak rudely about the great sage. The man claimed that this world existed only because of Lack. Lack in turn grinned about said that he just thought it was just a myth. The man, however, warned Lack that if he was so carefree, Magician Lack's fans might as well kill him, despite the fact that he was just a child. To be honest, those words seemed intimidating to Lack. Then the young man wondered who had built this monument. After all, his statue didn't even look like him. The first thing that came to Lack's mind was that Eric and Goblin put up the statue, which suggests that it is likely that Lack's comrades think he is dead. In the end, Lack decided to go to the Adventurers Guild. On the way, he thought about the words of that man who talked about how it had been 10 years. But the thing was, Lack didn't recall fighting for that long. In the end, Lack thought it was all just some kind of mistake. When Lack entered the Adventurers Guild, the first thing that caught his eye was a large poster. On it was a statue of Luck. As it turned out, this year, the adventurers, and indeed the entire people of the capital, were holding a ceremony to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Great Sage Lack's death. Seeing this poster, Lack realized that the man wasn't lying and 10 years had indeed passed. Lack wanted to intervene for a multitude of reasons, but he realized that right now, he needed to recover his guild card first. When Lack approached the counter, he was greeted by a guild employee. At that moment, behind his back, the young man heard an unpleasantly defiant question. Since when did this place become a kindergarten? Turning around, Lack saw an unpleasant fat man sitting at a table and looking at the young man with a smirk. Lack did not speak to this unpleasant guy and turned around to explain to the guild worker that he wanted to recover his card. But the guy behind the desk was quite angry that Lack was ignoring him. He raised his voice and ordered the young man not to ignore him. Lack turned around and pointed a finger at himself to make sure if the obnoxious guy was really talking to him. The boy, on the other hand, assured that it was him he was talking to. Then Luck was called boy again. Fixing his hair and striking a cool pose, Luck asked the stranger at what point he looked like a boy. Then the obnoxious fat man approached Lack and reiterated that Lack looked like a teenager. In that case, Lack decided to take a look at himself for the first time after he returned to his world. In the reflection, he saw a boy unfamiliar to himself and wondered who the young man was. But the type with the beer belly asserted to Luck that it was him. It was then that Luck realized that he had become even younger, even though 10 years had passed since he had parted ways with his comrades. The young man simply refused to believe it and at first thought it was all a simple joke. At this point, the annoying adventurer reiterated that the guild was no place for children. Meanwhile, Lack was trying to realize that what was happening now really wasn't a joke and perhaps it was because of the drying touch. Lack was too amazed, for he didn't think it would happen. At this moment, the daring adventurer continued to pester Lack. At this time, the guild master entered the guild, and the enraged adventurer was already ready to pounce on Lack to throw him out of the guild. At that time, the hand of Goblin, who is the guild master, laid on his shoulder. Goblin had tears on his face and snot was coming out of his nose. With a light sweep of his arm, the enraged Goblin swung the annoying adventurer away so that he fell to the floor with his feet up. Thereupon Goblin went to Lack's house. Lack, of course, recognized Goblin and was even glad to see him. But before the young man could say a word, Goblin picked him up and headed out of the guild. The adventurers and guild workers saw Goblin and Luck off in bewilderment. Only one thing was seen by everyone. Just then, Guildmaster Goblin was crying. But Goblin's tears didn't end there. Left alone with Lack, the Guildmaster became hysterical again. He knew that the real Lack was standing in front of him, so he couldn't stop hugging him, even though Lack asked him to let himself go. Whereupon Lack asked Goblin to stop crying. But Goblin, being hysterical and in tears, assured that he was not crying. Of course, Lack is indifferent when girls cry, but he is more concerned about the old man crying for him. That is why Lack again asked Goblin to stop crying, and the latter reiterated that he was not crying at all. After the warm greeting, Lack was fed with cakes, which he liked very much. While eating, Lack wondered how Goblin knew he was here. Goblin explained that he had been told that someone calling himself Lack had come to see him. So Goblin immediately thought that if it was Lack, he would immediately go to the guild. Whereupon Goblin asked Lack if he was hungry. Lack reminded Goblin that he hadn't eaten in 10 years, so now he was restoring energy with a drying touch. But his stomach felt like a black hole. At this moment, Goblin took the pastries from Lack and lifted the tray up. Lack reached for the taken brownies and asked Goblin what he was doing, to which Goblin replied that Lack was no longer allowed. Goblin argued that no one in his right mind would stuff his stomach with solid food after starving for 10 years, and the starving Lack continued to reach for his naturals and assure that he was fine. Goblin argued that he simply could not allow Lack to die for such foolishness after all he had been through, and, while Lack tried to get his cakes in various ways, Goblin ordered his servants to bring rice porridge. Of course, Lack was not thrilled, for he said he was fine and felt fine. At that moment, the door to the room opened. A tall guy with a hood on his head and a tray with a pot in his hands appeared on the threshold. "You are quite energetic." These words were spoken by the guy who entered, addressing Lack. Lack didn't realize at first who entered the room, unlike Goblin. Then the guy took off his hood. It was Eric, the third member of the group. Upon seeing Eric, Lack was dumbfounded. He remarked that even a ladies' man like Eric had still aged in these 10 years, as Goblin said. Meanwhile, Eric, hiding the tears in his eyes, remarked that Lack had done well and was able to return to his native land. This is when Lack realized that Eric had gone where Goblin had gone and was about to cry. It is worth confessing that Lack is worried about these two old men crying for him. And Eric at this time confessed that all the people thought that Lack had died, because it had been 10 years. Then Lack realized that those 10 years had indeed stretched long for his comrades. That was why, smiling, Lack reassured Eric, for he had already Joma. So, the trio of adventurers are all together, and Lack could only hope that Goblin and Eric would soon stop crying. After taking a bite to eat, Lack thanked Eric for the food. The young man admitted that the rice porridge was quite tasty, even though Lack didn't initially think so. Goblin and Eric continued to shed tears, for they realized that Lack had been starving for the good of their world for 10 years. It was then that Lack realized that his companions had clearly become too sentimental. Suddenly, Eric's face quickly transformed after the tears. He remarked that Lack had not aged a bit despite the fact that 10 years had passed. Goblin, on the other hand, agreed with Eric and remarked that Lack, on the contrary, looked much younger. Lack explained to his companions that it was likely that when he had defeated the demon lord with the tempting touch, he had seemingly absorbed all of his life force. Lack wasn't sure about that, but at this moment, it was his only guess. After saying that, Eric and Goblin opened their mouths wide in amazement. Lack noticed this and asked his frozen comrades what was wrong. As it turned out, they were shocked to hear that Lack had defeated the demon lord. Lack, however, explained that the demon lord had quickly recovered and attacked him. Thus, Lack simply had no choice. After such a statement, the dumbfounded Goblin and Eric looked at each other. There was no limit to their astonishment, for not only had Lack detained the demon army, but he had also single-handedly killed their lord. Eric could safely assume that this could only be done by the army of an entire country. Lack only scratched the back of his head and assured Goblin that he was exaggerating. But Eric assured that he was not exaggerating at all. After all, his country was preparing for the invasion of the demon lord, and he even had to increase his combat power. And Lack in turn single-handedly finished off the demon lord for his country. That's why Goblin suggested that Eric prepare a suitable reward for Lack. Eric didn't mind at all and agreed with Goblin. Since in the conversation Goblin called Eric not just by name but King Eric, Lack had some questions. Had Eric really become king of the country? But almost immediately Lack remembered that Eric was from the royal family. And Eric told Lack how he had been rewarded for his services in repelling the attack of the demon army. Now Eric is the king of the country, and Goblin is Grand Master of the Adventurers Guild. It was then that Lack realized that his comrades had indeed accomplished much. But those assured them that it was Lack who was their savior, the great sage, the Archmage, Archduke Lack Franzen. Lack's eyes widened at that statement. He did not understand what the Archduke meant, for he was not of their nobility. And who the hell is Franzen? The first thing Eric did was to ask Lack to calm down, after which he explained that he just wanted to reward Lack for stopping the demon army this way. Eric then pointed his finger at the very statue honoring Lack and explained that he was the one who had made it right after he became king. Lack then inquired if the nobles were against this title of Archduke, to which Eric replied that no one was against it, for Luck had no family or children. In addition, it is worth remembering that everyone believed that Luck was dead. Then Luck thought about the fact that it would be out of place if everyone found out that he was alive. Lack also didn't want to be involved in all these underhanded games with the nobility and didn't want assassins sent to him. Eric apologized to Luck and explained that he had already come to an agreement that if Luck returned alive, he would at least get the title of Earl. That's when Lack realized that he simply had no choice but to become a nobleman. In that case, he decided to make a request to Goblin. So, Lack wants to start his adventurer's journey with a clean slate. Of course, Golan and Eric were simply dumbfounded upon hearing such a statement. They didn't understand if Lack was in his right mind. After all, by doing so, he would destroy his history as an S-rank adventurer. But Lack thought it was just a great opportunity. After all, he wants to start fresh. But Golan thought that starting with a clean slate was just boring and stronger opponents would be suitable for Lack. Lack then declared that he was simply fed up with fed-up opponents. At that moment, the indignant faces of Eric and Golan changed. It was as if they understood their comrade. In the end, Eric supported Lack and asked Golan to do whatever Lack asked. After all, since Golan is a guild master, there shouldn't be any problems with restoring the guild map. Golan agreed and asked Lack to rely on him. After a while, Lack's guild card was ready. Lack looked at the card with bewilderment and discovered that his name was now Rock. Golan, however, explained that he had purposely made it so that only Lack's middle name would be visible, and his full name is Lack Rock Franzen. Lack was quite surprised that he had been given a new name, and Golan at this time explained to Lack that his new profession was F-rank warrior, and his main profession of S-rank mage was hidden with the help of magic. Now only the second profession of warrior would be visible. Thus, Golan has hidden Lack's main profession and it cannot be seen without the magic device that is in the guild headquarters. Also, the adventurer's card cannot be forged, so no one will reveal Lack's identity. Lack, on the other hand, felt it necessary to apologize to Golan for having to do all this. Golan in turn asked Lack to now just get a good night's rest. He had plenty of spare rooms at home. Lack then thanked his buddy for everything. Eric and Golan started to leave, and Lack took one more look at the Adventurer Guild building, after which he thought. The young man thought that if he could make it back, he could go on adventures with Golan and Eric again. Meanwhile, 10 years had passed and the situation had changed. From this moment, from this step, begins the new life of Lack, that is, the Adventurer Rock. 3 days later, in the morning, Golan was having breakfast at his home as usual. At that moment, the butler came up to him and noticed that Lack was still asleep. The butler was just wondering if Lack was alright. Golan, on the other hand, asked his subordinate not to worry and just let Lack rest. After all, now, the man who had been beating himself up for the past 10 years could finally sleep peacefully. Lack's morning began with a loud knock on his door. Lack reluctantly woke up and immediately realized he was very hungry. At first, the boy didn't even notice that someone was knocking on his door, but then the knocking sounded again. Since the servants addressed Lack as Rock, Lack didn't immediately realize that they were addressing him. Without thinking long, Lack got out of bed and opened the door to the room and asked the servant what was wrong. When Lack opened the door, the servant exhaled, because it meant that the young man was still alive. Lack, on the other hand, thought it was very obvious that he was alive and didn't understand what was wrong. The servant explained to Lack that he had not left his room for a week, which was why they were worried about him. Hearing the words about a whole week, Lack himself was dumbfounded. As it turned out, even though Golan had asked the servants not to wake Lack, they were still worried about him. Lack thanked the servant for his concern and decided that he should eat something since it had been a whole week. Wandering down the corridor with the servant, Lack asked if Golan was here, to which the servant replied that Golan was waiting for him in the dining room. When Lack entered the dining room, Golan was happy to see his comrade. The first thing he did was to apologize to Lack for disturbing him, but Lack assured him that everything was fine. Right now, what he cared most about was food, since he had slept for a whole week. Golan pointed out a pot of rice porridge to Lack and said that this porridge was prepared especially for him. Of course, Lack was not very impressed to see the rice porridge again, but he still eagerly pounced on it. Golan, on the other hand, asked him what he was going to do today. He assumed that Lack was planning to get some rest, but Lack assured that he had rested enough and was now going to look for a job in the guild. Golan in response could only ask Lack not to overwork himself, because it was simply useless to discourage the guy. Then Lack thought about the fact that he would need a new magic pouch if he were to go on an adventure all of a sudden. Golan, on the other hand, declared that he had already prepared a magic bag for Lack. Such a gift Lack was infinitely pleased, for Golan was thus bailing him out. After breakfast, Lack changed his clothes and took his sword, which previously belonged to the Demon Lord, and set off. At this time, a certain blonde-haired girl was practicing with the sword in the courtyard of Golan's house. As Lack was leaving the house, the girl noticed him and turned her attention. Lack was stopped by the butler, for he saw fit to apologize for his behavior on the first day of their acquaintance. And Lack himself understood why the butler did not let him in, because he was in rags and no one's fault. The butler thanked Lack for his mercy. Then Lack said goodbye to the servant and went on with his business. As he passed by his statue, Lack could not help but stop. He looked at himself again in the form of the monument and realized that he would never get used to it. At that moment, a little boy fell off his feet behind him. Next to him was a mother who picked up her son and, wiping his tears, said that such a crybaby would never become a great man like Lack. Then the boy declared that he would cry no more, and Lack, who had overheard this conversation, felt quite uncomfortable. He would rather the people did not use his name for edification. Finally, Lack reached the Adventurers Guild, and once inside, he went straight to the task board. After reading through a few orders, the young man did not find orders for dragons and demons to be of much interest to him. From this, Lack concluded that all was well and peaceful in the country, which he was glad. In that case, he decided to look at the tasks for newcomers. Since the young man realized that a task with a good reward would have to be shared with the youngsters, he decided to take a difficult task with a small reward. When Lack chose a task and approached the guild worker with it, the girl asked him if he was sure he could handle the task alone. To which Lack confidently replied, yes. The girl then asked Lack if he knew that goblin slaying quests were quite dangerous alone. The lady assured that she could not allow Lack to go on that task. Lack, on the other hand, assured that he knew all of this and it would be fine, as he actually has an S rank. The lady told Lack that there are plenty of newcomers who die because they underestimated the goblins. She tried to explain to the young man that she was doing it for his good and wanted Lack to listen to her. Lack realized that this girl was really worried about him and decided not to argue with her anymore. At that moment, Lack was approached from behind. If you don't mind, do you want to come with us? A man's voice sounded. Lack turned around and saw two budding adventurers. It was a blonde-haired guy and a short haircut girl with a bow in their hands. They explained that they were F-rank adventurers like Lack. The guy also said that their squad consists of a mage and a scout, so they are lacking someone in the vanguard. And the girl pointed out that Lack is a warrior, which is why they offered him to go with them. While Lack was digesting all the information said by these guys, the guild worker had already stamped the paper that said that Lack and the two would be the three of them to destroy the goblins. Before Lack could say that he had not yet given his consent, the guild worker menacingly and at the same time with a smile on her face said that he had better go with those two, because it would definitely be better. It was then that Lack realized that he simply had no choice. In the end, the young man hoped that he would get along with his new team. Finally, the boys introduced themselves. The blonde-haired tall guy with a good build is named Ariel. He can use a fireball. And the short haircut girl with the bow is called Genie. And if you need a bow, this girl can be relied on. As it turns out, Ariel and Genie are brother and sister to each other, and they are experts at exterminating goblins in the countryside. Ariel is 18 years old and Genie is 17. They are still young adventurers. At one point, Ariel asked Lack how old is he. But since Lack entered the interdimensional rift when he was 30 and fought for 10 years, he's now a 40-year-old man. But it's quite suspicious to be an F-rank adventurer at 40. That was why Lack simply said that he was only a little bit older than Ariel and Ginny. The guys laughed in response and remarked that Lack looked quite young. The guys' hunt for the goblins dragged on. Soon it became dark. In the dark, of course, the boys did not walk. That was why it was decided to make camp. Sitting not far from the campfire, Lack suddenly realized that he had not camped for quite some time. The last time was back when Lack was with Eric and Goblin. Suddenly, Genie asked Lack why he had taken the task of destroying the goblins. The girl was interested for a reason, for it is quite difficult and not much pay for it. Then Luck asked a counter question to the guys. Ariel and Genie wondered. Without thinking long, the boys said that their village was often attacked by goblins, but they were poor and couldn't afford to hire adventurers for protection, so they took it upon themselves to destroy them. The boys knew that there were plenty of places in the world besides their village that also suffered from goblin attacks. Because of this, Ariel and Genie became adventurous. After telling their story, Genie suggested that Lack took this assignment probably because he was worried about the farmers. Since Lack could not answer the girl's question honestly, he just confirmed her speculation. Then Genie suggested that the young men should decisively attack the goblins and save the villages. Luck, on the other hand, looking at his brother and sister, concluded that they were pretty good. And his task as the eldest was to raise young adventurers similar to these two. That was why Lack decided to act much more cautiously than usual. The night passed without incident. In the morning, the boys set off again. After arriving at the village, Genie gathered information from the villagers. As it turned out, the goblins destroyed 2 months' supply of grain, 2 oxen and 3 sheep. Also, the fence on the west of the village is often broken, so it is likely that the goblins attack from there. That means the goblin hideout is somewhere in the mountains. And considering the range of the goblins, the hideout is quite close. The number of goblins Genie determined to be a little over 14. and Ario also made some conclusions and agreed with his sister. Lack eventually suggested that his companions just go to the monster's lair. On the way, the boys studied every inch of the place to make sure they didn't miss anything. At one point, Jeannie realized that they were getting close and suggested that the boys go after her. Looking at the active Jeannie, Luck concluded that she was a good scout. The girl is good at reading tracks and is quite savvy. That's why Jeannie doesn't look like an F rank holder. But one thing Lack knew for sure. Jeannie had obviously miscalculated the number of goblins and failed to notice the camouflaged footprints. Besides, the most important thing is that goblins aren't smart enough to hide footprints, which means there's someone who controls them. At first, Luck wanted to tell Jeannie about her mistake. He called out to the girl, and she turned around and asked him what was wrong. But in the end, Lack decided not to say anything to her, because when you raise someone, you should not forget to make them realize things for themselves. After all, everyone learns from mistakes, especially when they are young. Still, although Lack did not tell the boys, he had a responsibility. Lack felt that he could not let Ario and Jeannie die. Finally, the boys reached the goblin's lair. Looking around, the boys noticed that it looked more like an old mine rather than a nest. Ginny spotted 2 guards and Luck scanned the long and deep tunnels. Since these tunnels are very confusing, there is a possibility that the guys are being ambushed. Especially the danger would be great if there are a lot of goblins there. That's why Lack immediately realized that it would be difficult. But Jeannie and Ario didn't understand Lack, for they didn't know or see what he saw. They just didn't realize how high the danger level was. Lack, on the other hand, knew that he could turn all the goblins to dust with one spell of his own. But for the sake of Ario and Ginny gaining experience, the young man was willing to do otherwise. Ginny then asked the boys what they planned to do. Ario suggested to just be wary. Ginny agreed with her brother. After all, it would be dangerous if they underestimated the goblins. At that moment, Lack came out of hiding and stated that he would go forward. Genie Lack asked him to cover him with his bow and Ario to save his magic. Before the boys could even blink an eye, Lack rushed forward to attack. Seeing the goblin, Lack did not hesitate to chop off its ugly head. Next to him was another goblin. Lack could have killed these 2 goblins in one fell swoop, but he decided to leave the second one to Genie. Genie wasted no time. Using her bow and arrow, the girl quickly neutralized the second goblin. When the passage was clear, Luck signaled the boys to move forward. Along the way, Luck complimented Genie on her excellent archery, and Genie responded by expressing her admiration regarding Luck's speed. Eventually, Lack asked Genie to watch out that he would not be attacked from behind, and Ario asked him to follow. Then Luck went first, Ario second, and Genie had his back. The boys ran into many goblins along the way, but they managed to deal with all the monsters. Genie attacked using her bow and arrow, Ario attacked with his magic, and Lack just tried to stay out of the way, giving the youngsters practice. Finally, when the road was clear, the boys decided to rest. There were clearly more goblins than they thought. Genie even estimated that they had already killed 30 monsters. Ario collapsed on the ground without strength with a question. What the hell is going on here? At that moment, Lack decided to give the guys a hint. Chewing on an apple, he said that there was a possibility that someone was controlling such a large horde of goblins. After making such a statement, Ario looked at Lack with surprise, and Lack asked Ario if he could still use the fireball. Ario replied that he could use the fireball if he only exerted himself. But the young man was afraid that he had already reached his limit. Then Lack turned to Genie and asked her how many arrows she had left. To which Genie replied that the number of her arrows at the moment was 3. After this, a silence hung between the boys. Suddenly, Ario suggested that the guys retreat. Lack was glad that Ario had made the right decision, and Ario was almost certain that such a horde was most likely ruled by a hobgoblin or goblin mage. Ario assured him that going forward without arrows or mana was a bad idea. No sooner had the young man finished his thought than a great rumbling sound was heard. It was someone's loud footsteps, someone big and scary. In a couple of moments, a huge goblin with a spiked weapon like a bat appeared in front of the boys. Looking at this monster, Luck concluded that the goblin lord was in front of them. From fear, Genie even hiccuped. Ario, on the other hand, panicked a lot, because a goblin lord wasn't a suitable opponent for F rank. Yes, even C rank veterans wouldn't be able to handle this monster. That was why the guys just didn't know what to do. Lack himself didn't expect to encounter a goblin lord in this place, but the young man knew that he could handle this monster. Still, the problem was that this goblin lord didn't seem like someone who could give smart advice to the goblins. Thus, Lack concluded that an even more powerful monster was behind it. At that moment, someone's feminine confident shout was heard. It was the sword-armed beast-like girl with ears and a tail that the reader had met at the very beginning of the story. Without a drop of fear, she pounced on the goblin lord, attacking him from the back. But the goblin managed to spot the falling girl. With his huge paw he tried to knock her down, but she dodged and still attacked the monster with her sword, at one point calling him a minnow. The girl felt that such a weak monster should not stand in her way. But unfortunately, she barely grazed the goblin, injuring its left eye. Despite this, the goblin roared loudly in pain. The girl in turn landed on her feet and began to think about what to do next. Looking at such a sight, Ario couldn't contain his emotions. A surprised wow came out of his mouth. The girl heard it even though the guys were far away, and Ario said it very quietly. Without thinking long, she realized that there was someone else here and ordered the guys to leave. Lack also asked Ario and Genie to run away. Without thinking long, the brother and sister started to run away. But Lack himself remained standing in the same place. At this moment, the goblin continued his battle with the fighting girl. He tried to attack her, but nothing worked, and she didn't plan to let him go alive. At this moment, Lack had already descended on the battlefield and turning to the lady with beautiful ears, asked if she needed help. Luck frightened the girl so much that her hair stood up. She was furious, for she ordered her to run away, but Luck assured her that he could help, and the girl in turn only asked Luck to just stand there and stay out of the way. That's what Luck did. He just stood and watched the battle. The girl kept attacking the goblin, but he defended himself well. Then Lack started climbing back where he came from. He was willing to leave, but lastly warned the girl that she would lose at this rate. These words angered the lady. She felt that in this way Lack had called her weaker than this goblin lord, that is to say, a petty brat. Lack, on the other hand, remarked that he had said no such thing. At that moment, the girl's sword broke into many pieces, and that was what Lack had said, for this girl's sword was not strong enough. Left alone with the monster without a weapon, the battle girl did not plan to retreat. She only continued to dodge the enemy's attacks. Then Lack asked her again if she needed help, to which the enraged lady stated that she was fine, and she asked Lack to run away and fast. Taking out her weapon from her back scabbard, the girl once again attacked the goblin with a scream. But the goblin managed to not only disarm the girl with one blow of his weapon, but also hurt her arm. The swordswoman barely landed on her feet and clutched at the goblin's battered arm, writhing her face in pain. At that moment, a familiar cloak flashed in front of her face. It was Lack. He stood up to defend the girl, covering her with his back. Lack decided not to ask anymore and just help this girl. Bearing his sword that previously belonged to the demon lord, Lack, with a smirk on his face, ordered the goblin to attack. The astonished lady looked at what was happening and understood nothing. The goblin was so enraged that it opened its mouth and began to roar at full force. His roar was so loud and prolonged that the girl had to press her ears to her head to keep from going deaf. Lack, however, did not just stand there and listen to the goblin's beautiful chants. He decided to take action, without giving the goblin a second thought. With just 2 swings of his sword, Lack chopped it into 4 pieces. What she saw made the girl's jaw drop. Lack, having defeated the goblin, first of all asked her if she was injured. She looked at the body parts of the goblin that remained of him and puzzled. What the girl wanted most of all now was to ask Lack who he was. Lack exhaled and then proudly declared that he was just an F-rank adventurer who was passing by. But the girl immediately realized that the young man was just lying to her. Lack then decided to show that one his guild card. After looking at the card, the girl was convinced that the young man was indeed an F-rank. Then Lack asked the girl if she believed him, and the girl didn't understand at all why Lack was so proud of his F-rank. Suddenly, she realized that she had forgotten to introduce herself, which is why she felt it necessary to apologize. Continuing to sit on her lap, the cute battle swordswoman finally introduced herself. Her name is Shia. She is a B-rank adventurer. Shia is the daughter of Danton, the chief of the Eastern Beastmen tribe. After bowing, the girl expressed her sincere gratitude to Laku for saving her. Lack even felt kind of awkward, so he asked Shia not to be so strange, and Shia decided to also apologize for her rudeness earlier. The girl realized that she had acted shamelessly by not realizing Lack's strength and ordering him to run away. That was why Shia was very ashamed of her behavior. Lack, on the other hand, asked the girl to just not take it into her head. He assured that everything was fine. Lack believed that Shia had done the same thing that any other adventurer would have done if he had been in her shoes, because she thought Lack was a newcomer and gave him a chance to escape. After which, Lack extended his hand to Shia and introduced himself, calling himself Rock and an F-rank veteran. Shia smiled, placed her hand on Lack's hand and rose to her feet. At this moment, Lack asked Shia if there was anyone else here. This question startled the girl, and Lack was sure that this enemy was stronger than the Goblin Lord, and it was downstairs. At this moment, a bat was watching the guys from above, but it was no ordinary bat. With the help of its eyes, the guys were seen by the one that Luck is now talking about. This monster is much stronger than the Goblin Lord. He realized that the humans were coming to him by themselves to sacrifice themselves. In that case, this terrifying monster decided to simply allow these humans to become food for his cursed medallion. At this point, Shia asked Lak what he meant when he talked about someone else. Then Lak reminded Shia that she had recently shouted about how the Goblin Lord was just a lowlife, which means that there is someone stronger than him here. At this point, Shia hesitated for a moment. Lak thought that the girl just didn't want to talk about it and headed in an unknown direction. Shia immediately tried to stop Lak and asked where was he going. Lak, on the other hand, decided to just go down to the lowest floor since the monster they are talking about now is right there. Lak realized that the order he accepted only spoke of goblins, but if there is someone strong here, he just can't ignore it for the good of the villages nearby. And so the young man is going to defeat this strong monster. These words inspired Shia at first, but then the girl's face changed. Shia admitted that Lak did have amazing willpower, but she thought that it was not an opponent that could be defeated by her alone. Shia claimed that their opponent was a vampire lord. These words alerted Lak, and Shia revealed that for generations, her tribe had hunted vampires, and yet, the vampire that her father could not defeat had recently reappeared. And it was a vampire lord. As it turned out, Shia finally discovered him after several months. Lak realized everything, but that didn't stop him and he continued to go down. Shia was dumbfounded that Lak, despite her warning, continued down into the vampire's lair. And Lak, though he wasn't sure he should say it, said that the vampire lord was stronger than the goblin lord that Shia couldn't handle. These words even made Shia a little angry. The girl felt that she, the daughter of the chieftain, should wash away the shame of her tribe even if she couldn't defeat the Goblin Lord. This attitude pleased Luck. He only asked Shia if this shame precluded them from working together, to which Shia replied that if someone helped her, she could still wash away this shame. In that case, Lak decided that it was okay. Lak handed Shia his sword, which had belonged to the demon lord before, because the girl would not be able to fight without it. Shia, who was surprised by such an act, asked Lak what would happen to him, to which Lak stated that he is strong without a weapon. Shia was very grateful to Lak. She realized that by giving her sword, her main weapon, Lak was telling her that she must defeat the vampire lord with her own hands. It was simply what she had hoped for. As the guys started to descend deeper and deeper, they encountered goblins on their way. All of them Lak defeated in hand-to-hand combat without a second thought. Shia looked at this and could not believe her eyes, because Lak managed to eliminate all the goblins without even having a weapon in his hands. Legs were also used. In this way, Lak killed not a few creatures with his strong legs. The monsters died one by one and finally the way was cleared. Lak, unharmed, only shook the blood of the goblins off his hand. Shia looked at this sight and didn't even know how to react. She was simply in a stupor from what she saw. Then the girl realized that Lak was really strong. Finally, the boys reached the lair of the vampire lord, who was already waiting for them. Upon seeing the enemy, Shia immediately shouted that she was going to destroy the vampire lord with her own hands. And the vampire thought it was funny that Shia was saying that someone weaker like her could defeat him, even though even her father's squad had gone to great lengths to only wound him. The vampire also remarked that Shia had no manners, for she entered his bedchamber without wiping her dirty feet. The vampire didn't like that Shia was underestimating him. That was why he was determined to kill her for choosing to bare her fangs at him, the Lord of the Night. The vampire also confessed that he should be grateful to Shia because she had brought a human to him. Shia did not understand what the vampire meant by this and asked about it. The vampire then stated that Shia's people were simply dogs who did not succumb to the charms of vampires. And since Lak is an ordinary human, the vampire can turn him into his slave by using his charms. At this point, Shia realized that things were bad. She turned to Lak and ordered him to get out of here quickly, but the vampire declared that it was too late. With his murderous gaze, it was as if he was devouring Lak. Lak at this time just stood there and didn't move. When the vampire calmed down, Shia turned to Lak without a drop of hope, but he remained silent, and the vampire at that moment ordered Lak to approach. Then Lak really started to approach the vampire. Shia looked at this but couldn't do anything. The girl realized that Lak had just succumbed to the charms. Shia blamed everything on herself. She realized that she had screwed up. The girl didn't understand how she could forget the charms of vampires. After all, there is not a single person who can resist the charms of a vampire lord. When Lak came close to the vampire turned to Shia and asked her what her choice was, to die by the hand of a human or a vampire. At that moment, Lak swung his fist at the vampire and punched him in the face with all his might. Grabbing the vampire by his chalk-white face, Lak threw his opponent back. Shia looked at what was happening and was puzzled. The vampire at this time could only utter a single word: impossible. He also didn't understand anything, and neither did Shia. When he asked Lak why his enchantments weren't working, Lak, shaking off his hand from the vampire's blood, replied that it was all because his mental defenses were quite high. But the vampire refused to believe it, for there is no human being who can resist the charms of a vampire lord. Then Lak suggested that the one just isn't a vampire lord. This is when Shia realized that Lak was just mocking the vampire lord. At this time, Lak suggested that the one in front of him was just an ordinary vampire who thought he was a vampire lord. These words made the vampire so angry that he decided to use another scheme. His body began to change shape, turning into a shapeless mass. This mass then headed straight for Lak. Before attacking, the vampire formed his face and declared that Lak could only repent for his taunts. After these words, the mass began to turn into sharp spikes right under Lak's feet. But the guy reacted quickly and bounced aside. To stay in the air, Lak used a high-level magic circle. Seeing this, Shia was dumbfounded, for she knew what kind of circle it was. In the meantime, Lak was ready to attack the vampire again by pushing off the magic circle, which he did. In flight, Lak managed to grab the vampire by the throat. Smiling, being face to face with the vampire, Lak asked the latter to let him show him how magic was different from his pathetic charms that he used on him. After saying that, Lak began to apply the magic. The vampire, upon realizing what this magic was quite frightened. And it was because it was the magic of drying touch, which Lak had used for far from the first time. In the end, the young man managed to draw out all of the vampire's strength. In the end, the vampire could only roar pitifully. When Lak thought that the vampire was already defeated, the opponent was able to form a sword in his hand and attack the young man. But fortunately, Lak was able to dodge this unexpected attack. Lak had noticed that the vampire couldn't defend himself from sucking out life force, even though he himself specialized in it. That was why Lak was confidently able to call this vampire the weakest. At this moment, the vampire had only one question for Lak: who is he? To which Lak replied that he was just a friendly neighborhood F-rank adventurer named Rock. But the vampire asked Lak not to bullshit him. Eventually, the vampire, becoming blacker than a cloud, declared that he would never forget the anger that Lak had awakened in him. The vampire wanted Lak to know that he would never have a good night again. With those words, the vampire tried to escape using bats. Lak realized that the vampire was trying to escape, but he wasn't going to stop him. At this moment, Shia on the contrary rushed to attack, holding the demon lord's sword that Lak had given her. The girl was unwilling to let the vile vampire go again, so she quickly approached and chopped his body into 2 pieces. The vampire realized that his regeneration was not working for some reason. It was then that Luck saw bats turn to ash for the first time. But the young man never expected to see anything less from the demon lord's sword. And Shia at that moment continued to swing her sword to destroy all the bats. Now all that was left of the vampire was his head. He could still speak and see everything that was happening. The vampire was ready to admit that he had been struck down. Suddenly, he saw the sword in Lak's hand. The vampire recognized that sword. He knew the sword belonged to the demon lord, but he couldn't believe his eyes. At that moment, Lak turned to Shia and asked her if this would cleanse her of her shame. To which the joyful Shia replied in the affirmative and thanked the young man. Shia also thanked Lak for the sword and remarked that it was very sharp. Shia also remarked that when she struck the blow, she felt that she was absorbing some power. Luck, however, not wanting to explain anything to Shia, said that it was just her imagination. Also, Shia was wondering what kind of drying touch Lak had just talked about. Of course, Lak didn't want to discuss it with Shia, so he decided to just change the subject and asked her if she was going to take the vampire's head back to her village. Shia realized that Lak didn't want to answer her question and only smiled coquettishly. After which, the girl squatted down and started picking something diligently in the ground. She also explained to Lak that taking the vampire's head back to the village was not necessary. After that, the girl found what she was looking for in the sand. Lak, on the other hand, asked in bewilderment, "What is it?" Shia explained that it was a locket that was buried with the body of the vampire lord. When the vampire lord drinks blood, the power of the curse is amplified in this locket. Then Lak realized that 10 years ago, there were no such things. That was why the young man concluded that it was some new fashion among vampires. At that moment, the vampire, of which only his head remained, began to laugh hysterically. He claimed that defeating him would not bring peace to the boys. And very soon, the gateway to the interdimensional rift would open thanks to the power of this medallion. At that moment, the words about the interdimensional rift were strongly lodged in Lak's mind. And the vampire claimed that once the gate opened, the world would be flooded by countless demons. And then the monster gods would descend from another dimension. They will be the dark gods. These terrifying words from the vampire's mouth made Shia's face darken. Meanwhile, the vampire did not close his mouth. He was ordering the boys to live in fear until that day came. After all, sooner or later, a multitude of vampire lords would come to the call of the locket and destroy the entire village. The vampire claimed that the entire Shia clan would become mere prey for the vampires. These words lingered in Shia's mind. She was terrified and couldn't move. In the meantime, Lak tossed the vampire medallion into the air. Then, using his sword, the young man chopped the medallion into 2 pieces. Immediately afterward, the area was illuminated with a bright light, and Shia and Lak began to be blown away by the wind. Thus, Laka's sword absorbed the power of the medallion that the young man had just chopped. When it was over, the medallion was gone, and Lak realized what a handy sword he had. The vampire, looking at this sight, was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that Lak's sword had just absorbed all the curses. The vampire looked at this sword and didn't realize what kind of weapon it was. And Lak said at this time addressing the vampire, that even if the gate opened, no demon would come in since he had just destroyed everyone. In the meantime, the vampire had an epiphany. He realized what kind of sword Lak was holding. The vampire also realized who Lak really was. Before Lak chopped the vampire's head in 2, the monster managed to say a few suggestive words. Great magician, Lak. Shia heard those last words of the vampire and realized everything too. The girl was simply astonished after realizing that the great sage mage Lak was really standing in front of her. Lak in turn turned to Shia, smiled and said with a wink that it was a secret. Shia was delighted. Her eyes shone and her admiration was unbounded. When the boys finally made it out of the goblin lair, Shia remarked that looking at Lak again, she could definitely see that he looked like a statue of Lak's hero. Lak, on the other hand, assured that he didn't look like that statue at all, and Shia continued to assert otherwise. On that good note, Lak's mission to destroy the goblins was completed. After completing the task, Lak was able to return to the guild by nightfall, and proudly declare that the destruction of the goblins was complete. As proof of this, the young man provided the guild worker with the goblin magic stones. When Lak dumped a large amount of stones on the table, the short-cropped girl behind the counter was simply hysterical, and Lak only asked her to help evaluate these stones. At this moment, the very same worker who had sent Lak on this task joined in. The girl was glad that Lak had returned safely from the assignment. After looking at all the stones provided by Lak, she was also a bit dumbfounded, for there were too many stones. At this time, Ario and Genie, as well as Shia, were standing behind Lak. Genie explained to the guild worker that the goblin horde was larger than they expected. But thanks to the B-rank adventurer, Shia, they were able to deal with the danger. Shia, on the other hand, smiled and only said that the guys were lucky that she was nearby. In that case, the guild worker felt that the guys were just lucky. That was why the girl felt it necessary to apologize to them. After all, it was a miscalculation on the part of the guild. In fact, the guys had prepared a cover-up beforehand. After defeating the vampire lord, Lak and Shia joined Ario and Genie, who were waiting for the guys throughout. Shia and Lak withheld Lak's identity as they explained what had happened. That the goblins were the vampire lord's underlings, and that the squad was lured there, of course, remained a secret. Also, the boys were silent about the fact that Shia had pursued the vampire lord to cleanse the honor of the non-tribe, and how she had defeated him magnificently. Well, in order to conceal Lak's identity, the guys said that he is an outstanding adventurer who has some circumstances to conceal his abilities. Ario and Genie were surprised, but because of what happened, they believed it all. But since the vampire lord could cause trouble for the guild, the guys decided that Shia would report him. After Shia finished her report, she went down to the first floor where the guys sitting at the table were already waiting for her. When Lak asked the girl if she had finished her report, Shia explained that it seemed like the guild was going to take some action to destroy the vampire lord. Also, after making sure that Ario and Genie couldn't hear anything, Shia decided to tell Lak something else. As it turned out, Shia decided to give half of the cursed medallion to the guild. Then Lak asked the girl if it was a good idea, to which she replied that as long as she had the other half, she could prove that she had purified the honor of her people. Also, Shia felt that half of the cursed medallion would be needed by the guild when they reported. In that case, Lak was fine with the girl keeping the other half of the medallion for herself. At this moment, Ario and Genie began to eagerly ask Shia to have a drink with them. Shia in turn didn't mind. After resting and drinking a bit at the guild, the guys went home. Ario was having the most fun since he had drunk too much. His sister tried to support him, but he still continued to indulge. At some point, Lak noticed that Genie and Ario had fallen behind. Turning around, the young man saw his brother and sister sitting on their knees and praying for something. Lak wondered what they were doing. Ario, on the other hand, assured that Lack should also pay his respects. As it turned out, Ario and Genie were kneeling in front of the statue of the great hero Lack. They believed that the boys were only able to complete the order without difficulty because of Lack's divine protection. Ario and Genie were sure that Lack was the man thanks to whom everyone in this world still lived. Lack at this time, standing behind the guys, felt quite awkward, and Shia agreed with Ario and Genie's words. The girl believed that they were indeed under Lack's divine protection. Without thinking long, she too decided to pay her respects to Lack, and Luck looked at this chaos and didn't understand what was going on. When it was time to say goodbye, brother and sister thanked Shia for her help and promised each other to meet again. Lack and Shia saw Ario and Genie off with a look. Shia was glad that Ario and Genie realized how lucky they were despite being shy and fearful. The girl thought that these guys could become great adventurers in the future. Lack agreed with Shia, for he too was glad that Ario and Genie were alright. Suddenly, Shia realized that if you looked at it that way, she was in a similar situation, because if it wasn't for Lack, who knows what would have happened to her now. Lack, on the other hand, smiled and said that it was because of Shia that he now knew about vampire patterns. That was why the young man believed that he was in the same boat as Shia. Shia smiled and, with a sigh, asked Lack not to imitate her. In that case, Lack wondered if Shia could share with him the information her tribe had about vampires. After all, the beastmen that are vampire hunters should know more than ordinary humans. Shia then asked Lack if that would be enough for him. Lack explained that if the goal of the vampires is to open the interdimensional rift and summon the dark gods, then it would no longer be the problem of the beastmen alone. That was why the young man wanted to learn more about vampires. Lack didn't plan to let the world he was finally able to protect be resolved in front of everyone. After saying those loud words, Lack looked at Shia's strange face. Then the guy asked what was wrong. As it turned out, Shia noticed that Lack really looked like his statue as the young man was giving his speech against the backdrop of the monument. But Lack refused to believe it and assured that he looked nothing like that. In the end, Shia decided not to argue with Lack. She was just very happy that Lack was on her side. In the end, the girl decided to quickly return to her village, gather information and return to Lack with her. Lack waved a fleeing Shia's hand one last time and advised her to look for him at Goblin Manor if she needed anything. It should be said that Shia entrusted half of the cursed locket to Lack, who was now holding it in his hand. In the end, the guy decided that he should report everything to Goblin. The Adventurers Guild is a large organization. The bigger the organization, the longer it takes to make decisions in it. And it would be quite some time before the case of the Vampire Lord would reach Goblin's ears. The Vampire Lords themselves are not that scary, but their plan is really dangerous. Had Lack found out about it later, it could have been fatal for the entire country. Lack realized that it was probably not easy for Shia to report this to the guild and also entrust this medallion to him. After a while, Lack was already at home. He realized that he had to live up to the expectations placed on him, so he planned to tell Goblin everything. When Lack returned home, he was met by a worried Goblin. As it turned out, Lack had made Goblin very worried about himself, for the young man had disappeared from home for 3 days after he said he was going for a little walk. Goblin insisted that Lack at least give Lack a warning if he was going to be late. That's when it struck Luck that Goblin was his mom. He decided to just admit he was sorry and then showed Goblin half of the cursed locket, and said he would forgive him after he told him about his journey. Placing the half of the locket on the table, Lack immediately warned that this news was quite disturbing. Some time later, when Lack told Goblin about everything, the latter was simply dumbfounded. And at some point Lack thought that the demon lord he had defeated was just a vanguard of the dark gods. Then Goblin asked the young man if he could examine the medallion with a special machine. Lack, in turn, allowed Goblin to do whatever he wished with the medallion. When he left, Lack only warned him that he was going to contact the owner of the locket, Shia. Goblin understood and promised Lack to inform the gatekeeper. When Lack was ready to leave Goblin's room to go to Shia, Goblin called out to him. Bowing his head, Goblin thanked the young man for saving the newcomers. Goblin wasn't just thanking Lack for that, but as a guild master. Lack only smiled in response and asked Goblin not to worry about anything. At that moment, someone's black silhouette appeared right outside the door. It was the same girl who had previously practiced in the garden with a sword. This girl had managed to scare Lack really well, because she crept up to the door silently with a scowl on her face. Looking at Lack, the girl snorted and continued to stare at him. As it turned out, her name was Solaris. Goblin, seeing the girl, decided to introduce her to Lack, but she just silently glared menacingly at Lack, and then turned away and walked away. Lack was dumbfounded by what had just happened. Then he turned to Goblin and asked who the girl was. Goblin explained that she was his daughter, named Solaris, who was about to turn 15. Lack concluded that this girl obviously hated him for something. Goblin, on the other hand, believed that it was his fault, not Lack's, since he had prevented Solaris from becoming an adventurer. Lack then asked Goblin why was he against it. Goblin, on the other hand, recognized that if one forgot that he was her father, she was quite fit to be an adventurer. But Goblin also believed that Solaris was still a child and lacked the caution and knowledge to be an adventurer. Lack, however, reminded Goblin that caution and knowledge could be gained with experience. It also seemed to the young man that Goblin was overprotective of his daughter. Goblin explained that he should consult his wife before making a decision, but she had gone to a neighboring country on business. Lack understood everything and suddenly thought about the fact that he had never met Goblin's wife before. After a little thought, Goblin stated that he had a request for Lack. Fast forward a few minutes, Solaris once again went to the garden to practice. There was too much hatred in this girl. She was all huffing and puffing and snorting with anger. Lack, on the other hand, was watching Solaris through the window while holding a book of magic spells. As he watched, Lack realized that Solaris did indeed have talent, and from that side of her she was clearly like Goblin. A couple minutes ago, Goblin had asked Lack to keep an eye on his daughter, since he wouldn't be able to prevent Solaris from registering with the Adventurers Guild. Her father realized that at this rate, his daughter would simply register as an adventurer and travel on her own. That was why he asked Lack to keep an eye on her. Lack, however, realized that it wouldn't be easy since Goblin's daughter hated him for whatever reason. Even now, Solaris noticed Lack at the window and started looking at him with a lot of anger in her eyes. Lack decided not to emphasize it and went to have lunch. At some point, Solaris entered the dining room. The maid immediately asked Solaris how many cakes she wanted, to which a satisfied Solaris replied 3. But the smile on the girl's face was short-lived. As soon as she saw Lack, her face changed again. When the girl started looking at Lack with hatred again, Lack thought he had something on his face. But Solaris clearly wanted to say something else. At that moment, it seemed to Lack that Solaris had learned his true identity. At that moment, Solaris declared that Luck was her father's illegitimate son. Such a statement made the departing butler with tray in hand stumble and Lack choked on his tea. Solaris looked at everyone again with a frown to restore order. Lack wiped his mouth from his tea with a towel and fell silent. Solaris, on the other hand, thought she had guessed and Lack was simply at a loss for words. Then Lack began to deny the words said by the girl, for he is clearly not the son of Goblin. But Solaris stood her ground and would not even listen to Lack. As it turned out, the girl made these conclusions for a reason. First of all, Goblin waited until Solaris' mom was not at home and only then brought Lack here. In the second place, Goblin looked very happy after Luck appeared. And thirdly, while Lack was away from home for 3 whole days, Goblin couldn't find a place to be. That was why Solaris concluded that Lack was Goblin's illegitimate son. At this point, Lack himself believed that he was Goblin's son, because Goblin really acts like he is Lack's mom. Lack realized that Solaris had simply jumped to the wrong conclusion, but the facts say otherwise and are quite difficult to disprove. At that moment, the young man noticed that tears came to Solaris's eyes, and the girl herself called her father a fool right out loud. At that moment, Lack realized that this whole situation could clearly lead to the breakup of the Goblin family. There was no more anger on Solaris's face. She was depressed, and Lack could directly feel the butler's gaze on him, begging for him to say something. This butler, who seemed to recognize Lack's personality, he just has a chilling gaze. That's why Lack decided to explain everything to Solaris and not lie. The young man confessed that he is actually a fellow Goblin who is already 40 years old. Of course, at first Solaris did not believe it, for Lack clearly does not look 40 years old. On the contrary, hearing these words, the girl concluded that Lack is her older brother. But Lack immediately refuted this. In that case, Solaris decided that Lack was her younger brother. At this point, Lack lost all hope of explaining anything to the girl properly. Desperate, the young man decided to show the girl his guild card. On it, Solaris read the name Rock. Lack, however, explained that the card did not bear the surname Morton, as Goblin had, and that this proved that Lack was not his son at all. But Solaris felt that her father simply did not recognize Lack. Lack was simply dumbfounded. He had no idea how Solaris had even come to that conclusion. In the meantime, Solaris apologized to Lack. The girl thought that Lack had suffered because of Goblin, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. Wiping away her tears and snot, Solaris even allowed Lack to call her big sister from now on. Luck's horror at that moment was unparalleled. He was so dumbfounded that he had no idea how else to convey to Solaris that he was not any son of Goblin. The young man then decided to speak to the girl differently. When he addressed her by name, Solaris asked to call her big sister. Although Lack was excessively infuriated by this, but he still called the girl his big sister. Solaris liked the way Lack addressed her. With a smile on her face, the girl thought that Lack wanted to talk to her about his confession. That was why Solaris asked the young man not to worry and promised him to talk to his mom about it. The girl realized that her mom would most likely get angry and tie up her dad, while Solaris herself planned to give Goblin a good whipping. This is when Lack realized that in this way they were back to the collapse of Goblin's family again. In view of this, Lack decided to go to extreme measures. He looked at the butler with a hint for him to come out. The butler took the hint, and in a second only Lack and Solaris were left in the dining room. Then Lack addressed Solaris by name again, but she glared at him menacingly and he took the hint. Calling the girl his big sister, Lack asked her if she could keep a secret. Solaris replied that of course she could keep secrets. In that case, Lack decided to reveal his true identity to her. To do so, the young man took off his disguise. After that, he showed Solaris his guild card again, where the girl saw Lack's name and S rank. At that time, Lack confessed that he was indeed the mage Lack. The young man thought that Goblin's daughter should realize who he was, and Solaris did indeed know the great sage Lack. Jumping up from his chair, Solaris asked loudly what was the meaning of all this, to which Lack replied that it all meant what he had just said. The young man explained that he had returned from the interdimensional rift 10 days ago. That is why he says that the story that Goblin was his fellow adventurer is true. Solaris was confused, for she had not expected such a turn of events. But as it turned out, Solaris did not understand anything at all, for she now believed that her great sage Lack was her younger brother. Here Lack was ready to fall through the ground. Now Solaris realized why that hero statue of Lack reminded her so much of her daddy. The girl was sure that it was all because Lack is the son of Goblin. This is when Lack realized that Solaris was confusing more and more and he couldn't even stop her. So, it took a whole hour to successfully change the stubborn Solaris' mind about her settled notions. Within an hour, the girl was on her knees before Lack. She claimed to be insanely sorry. Meanwhile, the exhausted Luck sat on a chair and dreamed of getting rid of this disgrace. In the end, the young man concluded that this girl had a very strong imagination, and Solaris said that it was indeed true and she was often told about it. And Lack then realized why Goblin was against his daughter becoming an adventurer. Also, Lack knew that such a strong imagination also implies a strong will. That is why he decided to propose to Solaris, and fortunately not marriage. Within a short time, Lack and Solaris were standing at the foot of the mountain. Solaris gazed at the beauty of nature and could not tear her eyes away. So, Lack asked Solaris to do a simple task for the guild. She had already registered as an adventurer, which was what Goblin feared. If Lack didn't go with Solaris, she would take some assignment on her own and travel alone. Lack realized that Solaris just wanted to explore the world around her on her own. On the way to the mission, Solaris did not miss the opportunity to splash in the river. Suddenly, the girl had a question ripe for Lack. She wondered why he had joined her on her adventure. After all, E-rank tasks should be boring for an S-rank adventurer. Lack was silent. Solaris then speculated that Lack was doing all this because she was the daughter of his old comrade. Lack confirmed Solaris's speculation, but Lack also believed that it was also the veteran's responsibility to raise the youth. In view of this, Lack wondered why Solaris wanted to become an adventurer. Solaris revealed that she did not grow up on lullabies, but on many stories of her daddy's adventures. Dragons the size of mountains, strange birds inside volcanoes, flying whales. These stories were a little more interesting than any picture book, since Daddy Solaris was the main character in them. Lack then suggested that this was why Solaris had decided to become a fighter like Goblin. Solaris in turn admitted that she really wanted to be like her dad. Also, she has no talent for magic. And, although being a fighter with thin feminine hands sounds terrible, Solaris is one. This she proved by lifting a heavy stone right in front of Lack's eyes, which really impressed him. Solaris just wished she could be as strong as her daddy, a fighter who can protect everyone. Lack, however, warned Solaris that it would be quite difficult to surpass Goblin, for he is inhumanly strong. Solaris knew this herself. She realized that she wasn't as talented as her father, but that was why she felt she should put in more effort. At this point, Lack thought for a moment, and then asked Solaris if she knew how many times her father had been on the brink of death. After all, every adventurer who stepped into the path of Goblin lost his life before he reached his level. It is worth saying that the reasons why Goblin, Eric, and Lack were able to survive are because of their outstanding talents, dedication, and the fate that was placed upon them. Thus, it is likely that this trio would be dead by now if they failed to throw out 6 every time. They were constantly getting into these kinds of situations until today. Those words sank straight into Solaris's soul. The girl thought for a moment, and Lack added that there were no workarounds after all, and the fastest is to take tasks that suit you and help you become stronger. Lack assured that this path was the best way to become like Goblin. Solaris smiled at Lack and agreed with him. After talking for a bit, Lack suggested that Solaris should go further. It's worth admitting that Lack's words weren't actually true. After all, even when people took the tasks that suited them, they still died while doing them. The guild could have miscalculated the risks like they did with the goblins last time. Thus, if Ario and Genie weren't with luck, they would definitely die. But now there is something that Lack can do for Solaris. He can give her knowledge and various techniques to keep her from losing her life. Lack and Solaris traveled to yet another village that was troubled. Solaris questioned the locals and they said that there were as many rabid beasts as indicated on the mission. There didn't seem to be any human casualties, and the attacking monsters were Cerbers, Hydras, Chimeras, Cyclops. Also, there were even dragons, to which Solaris was very surprised. Lack evaluated the situation and concluded that in that case, this assignment was not suitable for E rank. Solaris agreed with Lack and wondered what was going on here. After all, there shouldn't be any magical creatures near the capital, and Lack speculated that was why the guild had decided that these beasts didn't really exist. Here, Solaris hesitated even more. Lack, on the other hand, asked the girl to try to ponder, setting aside all her prejudices. A group of beasts have been known to be sighted, but they don't exist, and they don't harm humans. What could it be? Suddenly, Solaris suggested that it might be illusion magic. Lack, on the other hand, also thought about it. That was why the young man suggested that the girl should rather hurry to the place where the monsters were last seen. Subsequently, the boys managed to find that very dragon, which, admittedly, frightened them quite a bit. At that point, Solaris was beginning to doubt that it was really illusion magic, for she could feel herself getting hot. But Lack assured that it was definitely an illusion, because the ancient dragon is simply impossible to meet at this point in time. Also, Lack did not feel this dragon's weight, which is why he asked Solaris not to give in to illusion. Looking at the imaginary dragon, Lack asked Solaris to just go for this monster and not be afraid of anything. With that, Solaris did just that. Despite her fear, the girl rushed straight towards the monster, even though it wasn't real. So, the battle between Solaris and the huge illusion of the dragon began. The first thing, the dragon decided to sweep Solaris off with its tail, but it failed, as the agile girl jumped over the tail and climbed on top of the dragon. Solaris ran determinedly down the dragon's back, planning to get to its head. At one point, the dragon lost sight of the girl and could not find her. He was also hindered by the fog that had formed around. Finally, Solaris revealed herself. She was in the air and headed straight for the top of the dragon's head to attack. The dragon, however, managed to spot the danger in time. It set up its paw, and Solaris' sword struck the monster's claw. The girl did not despair and began to chop the dragon's claws. Lack at this time just watched with a smile on his face. He could see that Solaris' skills as a fighter were incredible. Even considering her bias towards Goblin, her strength is at the level of a B-rank adventurer. Thus, Solaris can safely be put on the same level as Shia. However, Lack was more interested in something else entirely. Looking at that dragon, the young man realized that it was a monstrously realistic illusion magic. Even Lack himself was not capable of such a thing. When it comes to illusion magic, low-level mages are only capable of creating phantoms. But this dragon is equal to a gigantic accumulation of magic power. Thus, since Solaris' sword came into contact with the illusion, Lack is sure that she also felt its reaction. And the more she reacts, the more she seems to possess a mind. At one point, the dragon decided to attack Solaris with its flames. Opening its maw, it directed a hot stream of air directly at the girl. Solaris covered her face with her hands in horror, but that still didn't save her and the girl's body was thrown back. This was the moment Lack saw fit for his attack. Using acceleration, the young man flew towards the dragon from high. In the end, he managed to jump directly onto the monster's face. Without thinking long, Lack began to study. For this illusion magic he would learn with pleasure. After finishing his study, Lack climbed down from the dragon and used his magic to dispel the illusion. Thus, in just a few seconds, there was nothing left of the dragon. When the young man finished absorbing the illusion into himself, he noticed something rustling in the bushes. Without paying much attention to it, Lack turned to Solaris, who was rolling on the ground, and asked how long she was going to do it. Solaris jumped up and asked the young man worriedly if she had any burns on her. Lack, however, explained that there were no burns on the girl, for it was all because it was only illusion magic. Lack also pointed out that Solaris was doomed to defeat if she was going to fight illusion magic head-on. Solaris, on the other hand, felt that it would have been better if Lack had told her that a little earlier. Then Lack explained that with that kind of illusion magic that could fool Solaris, she could even kill herself if she believed she was injured. Lack assured that in such cases, it was better to retreat if she could not locate the mage's location. But Solaris fumed upon hearing such advice, for she believed that retreating was unpleasant. Lack, on the other hand, assured that it was better than dying. More importantly, Lack realized that the illusionist who was involved in all this was now eavesdropping on him and Solaris. That was why the young man wished that this coward would come out of the shadows and talk to them. Just in case, Lack prepared to draw his sword, for he didn't know what kind of person this illusionist would turn out to be. Lack knew that this man had not harmed anyone from the village and just wanted no one to come here. However, Lack tried to explain to the illusionist that he and Solaris had taken an assignment in the Adventurers Guild. Thus, if the stranger continued to remain silent, the guys would have to make him talk. After saying those words, silence hung in the clearing. Solaris and Luck kept their eyes open so as not to miss the appearance of the stranger. Suddenly, a child's voice was heard. "I have something to protect." These words were spoken by an unfamiliar voice. Lack immediately realized that the illusionist was a child. Without thinking long, the young man asked if the thing he had to protect was here, and could not the stranger take this unknown to another place, to which a childish voice answered the lad that it would be difficult to do so. In that case, Lack decided that he and Solaris would have to report that they had failed the task at the guild. Solaris wasn't happy about that, as she didn't want to return to the guild with such bad news. Lack didn't care at all. With that confession, he began to leave. Solaris then rushed after the guy and tugged at the hem of his clothes and asked Lack if he was concerned about the failure, to which Lack replied that he was not at all concerned about a little failure on her part. Solaris had tears in her eyes on this occasion, as they would be failing her first assignment. Lack assured her that Solaris couldn't be demoted below F rank, so she didn't have to worry about being demoted. Solaris didn't like what Lack was talking about now at all. The girl panicked and trembled. She was more worried that she didn't know what she would say to her father when she returned. And Lack was determined to continue his conversation with the lurking illusionist. Lack tried to explain to the stranger that he didn't care if he failed this mission. But even if he did fail, another adventurer would be sent here. The point is that the next adventurer may not be so cooperative, and will force the illusionist to speak by force. Also, this adventurer may even kill the young illusionist. The illusionist himself realized this, and Lack assured that if it came to that, it would be bad for everyone. That was why the young man wanted to avoid such a turn of events by any means necessary. The illusionist understood Lack perfectly and decided to show himself. At that moment, space distorted, and in a moment, a young man with blonde hair and a hood appeared in front of the guys. Looking at the boy, Solaris realized that he was a boy. Then his horns caught her eye. Without a moment's thought, Solaris realized that he was a demon. With a quick movement, she unsheathed her sword and shouted that the stranger was a demon and prepared for battle. Lack, however, stopped Solaris by extending his hand. Meanwhile, the illusionist decided to remove his hood. Then Lack recognized that it was the amazing magic of illusion. Besides, the stranger had completely concealed his presence. The boy thanked Lack for his praise. Lack then decided to introduce himself and introduce Solaris. The young boy labeled himself as a rank F adventurer who was just passing by. After that, the stranger also introduced himself. As it turned out, a demon named Lucilius had positioned himself in front of the guys and was very happy to meet them. At this point, Solaris reached for Lack's ear and asked in a whisper, "Aren't demons evil creatures?" To which Lack replied that this is only a common misconception. Although in fact demons have powerful magic and are very capable in battle, but that doesn't know that they are hostile. However, Luck picked up on the fact that Lucilius does belong to an unusual race around which there are many rumors. After all the explanations for Solaris, Lack turned to Lucilius and asked the boy what he wanted to protect. Lucilius then decided to demonstrate to the boys what he really wanted to protect. That is why the young man asked the boys to follow him. He also allowed the boys to keep their swords with them. Lack inquired as to why Lucilius allowed them to keep their swords, and Lucilius explained that he just realized that Lack was much stronger than him as a mage because Lucilius' illusion magic didn't work on Lack. In addition, Lucilius picked up on the fact that Lack was not trying to forcefully learn his secret, so he decided to trust the stranger. After a while, Lucilius led the boys to a certain abandoned temple and told them that they were on the spot. Going inside, Lack immediately realized that these ruins are very ancient. These bas-reliefs even looked like oriental ruins. When Lucilius took the boys to the right room, he appeared on his knees before a certain Herberg and informed him that he had returned. Luck and Solaris looked at the person before whom Lucilius knelt. To the boys' great surprise, it was a chicken. But it's worth noting that the chicken had a killer look in its eyes. When he saw the guests, he raised his beautiful scallop and spread his magnificent wings. Could it really be a divine chicken? When Solaris called the one Lucilius worshipped a chicken, the illusionist was enraged. Lucilius called Solaris a brazen rascal and said that calling the sacred Herberg a chicken was out of bounds. But Solaris stood her ground, for no matter how you look at it, Herberg is really just a chicken. Lucilius didn't like that the girl kept calling Herberg a chicken. And while the conflict between the two was going on, Lack was looking at the sacred Herberg and eventually realized that Solaris was indeed right. After all, no matter how you look at him, Herberg looks like a chicken. Then Luck asked Lucilius to explain who this Herberg was, to which Lucilius replied with shining eyes that Herberg is a holy rooster endowed with divine powers. At this point, Solaris reiterated that Herberg was all just a chicken. After these words, Lucilius became angry again. Then Luck covered Solaris' mouth just in case and asked Lucilius, "What is this divine power of Herberg?" As Lucilius replied, legend says that Herberg's ancestors awakened this world with their cry. The sacred rooster is the god that Lucilius' tribe worships. With a sad face, Lucilius told that his tribe lived in the mountains far to the north. That was until the day a band of vampires suddenly attacked the village, and only Lucilius had managed to escape then. This story stunned Solaris and Lack. They stood with terror in their eyes. Lucilius, however, went on to tell how the tribal chief had entrusted him with Herberg as the youngest in the entire tribe and told him to run away. Lucilius used the magic of illusion to escape, but these people are still chasing him. Lack then pointed out that vampires are quite savvy, so they cause a lot of trouble. Lucilius only agreed with Lack. Luck speculated that there was a possibility that people who were cursed might have come here, so Lucilius used illusion to scare them away. But Luck also wondered why Lucilius had come to this particular ruin. Lucilius, however, explained that these ruins were part of an ancient temple that had a barrier placed on it to scare away vampires. But Luck did not sense any barrier here, so he asked if this was really so. Lucilius told him that it was written in a map that had been handed down from generation to generation in his tribe. Then Lack asked the young man if any pursuers had tried to attack him since he had come here. Lucilius said that at first he and Herberg were attacked several times, but later the attack stopped. At that moment, Lack had an epiphany. He suddenly put the puzzle together. When Luck explained that the attacks did not stop because of the barrier, Lucilius was simply dumbfounded. Luck explained that there had recently been a battle nearby between vampire hunters and vampires. Therefore, they didn't have the strength to attack Lucilius. Here both Lucilius and Herberg were shocked. They began rushing around the ruins left of the temple in a panic to think of a place to hide. Luck, however, calmed Lucilius by explaining that the vampires and their boss had been destroyed, so they would not come after him. Lucilius, on the other hand, thought and worried that other vampires might still show up to take Herberg. Then Luck asked the young man why are the vampires after Lucilius and Herberg. Lucilius began by saying that it was all about Herberg. Luck then asked if it had anything to do with the world awakening power that Lucilius had mentioned earlier. Lucilius assured that it was indeed related, for this power was able to create boundaries in this world. And when the world awakened, it created a boundary between day and night. And Herberg's voice is endowed with the power to discern this world and its boundaries. In addition, it can intercept any movement between worlds. At this point, Luck thought for a moment. After pondering for a bit, the young man asked, did all this mean that Herberg was able to close the passage to the interdimensional rift? To which Lucilius replied that it did indeed. Now Lack finally understood everything. It meant that the vampires were beginning to despair. Their plan was to use the power of the cursed medallions to open an interdimensional rift and summon the gods from another dimension. But their entire plan could be derailed by the clucking of a single chicken. That's why Luck decided to ask Lucilius to come with him and head to the capital with Herberg. Not understanding anything, Lucilius, however, asked Luck what he meant by this. At that moment, Luck bared his sword and stuck it into the ground. The young man explained that this sword belonged to the demon lord, and there is only one reason for it to be here. Hearing such a statement, Lucilius was dumbfounded, and Luck said that this sword is here for the reason that he was able to defeat the demon lord with his own hands. At this moment, Solaris began to gesture to praise Lack, who didn't like it very much. Lucilius, however, stood bewildered and understood little. He simply could not believe that the great sage Luck was really standing before him. After realizing that this hero had survived after all, Lucilius was dumbfounded even more. Although Luck did not like the nickname of the great sage, but he still confirmed Lucilius' words. That was why the young man wanted Lucilius to confide in him. Getting down on one knee before the illusionist, Luck swore on his own name that he would protect Herberg at the cost of his life. Luck tried to explain to a surprised Lucilius that Herberg had the power to save the world. Lack understood that Lucilius did a good job of defending this rooster, and on behalf of everyone living in this world, Lack was ready to express his gratitude to the entire tribe of Lucilius. That is exactly what the young man did. Hearing such warm words for him, Lucilius could not hold back his tears. The boy realized that for the sake of his tribe, he needed to protect Herberg. Previously, Herberg had been protected by Lucilius's entire tribe, but now it was the rooster's turn to save the world. And now, when the great sage Luck was thanking Lucilius for everything he had done, the young man just couldn't contain his emotions, for he felt something unimaginable. It was a feeling of pride that simply overwhelmed Lucilius. In the end, Lucilius agreed to go to the capital with Luck and Solaris. On the way, Solaris wondered whether her father would allow her and her pet to live together, since Lack was just a freeloader living in Goblin's mansion. These words of the girl once again hurt Lucilius. After all, Herberg is not just a pet. But Solaris could not be persuaded, because on the outside, Herberg looks like an ordinary chicken. At this moment, someone's unfamiliar hand reached out to Lucilius' shoulder. It was a vampire. Fortunately, Luck was able to react before the vampire would have touched Lucilius with its filthy paws. The young man grabbed the vampire by the throat and prepared his fist to attack. At that moment, everyone froze. Lucilius was terrified looking at the vampire's paw that was so close. Solaris also didn't expect such a sharp attack. Only Lack still had a smile on his face. Without thinking long, the young man punched the vampire right in the vampire's face, causing it to fly away. The vampire didn't just start spitting blood, his fangs even fell out. But the monster was not confused and used the same technique that the vampire lord used. It was as if it turned into a shapeless mass to retreat. In just a couple of seconds, the silhouettes of 3 vampires appeared in front of the guys. Lack was in a stupor, while Solaris, who had already bared her sword, was ready to fight and protect Lucilius. At that moment, one of the vampires who had been pummeled by Lack turned to Lack and asked who he was, calling him a bastard. To which Luck replied that he had no reason to give his name to an inferior vampire. At this point, it was as if the vampires had reached a new level. They changed their appearance, becoming even more powerful. The words about inferior vampires from Lack's mouth had clearly hurt them. Solaris realized that the monsters had used the enhancement skill and concluded that these vampires really didn't look like inferior vampires. Lack, in truth, knew that himself. He just said it on purpose. Lack realized that right now, these vampires had definitely come for Lucilius. That was why their target was still the sacred rooster. In that case, Lack decided that he couldn't afford to let the vampires escape. At the snap of a finger, Lack used magic arrows that flew out from the magic circle above the vampires' heads and embedded into their bodies. Lack planned to attract the vampires and then catch them all at once. That was why the magical arrows were followed by Lack's fire dungeon. Even though the vampires began to burn with blue flames, they were still alive, but Lack was not upset, for he did not plan to let them go alive. At that moment, Herberg glowed with a bright blinding light, and then he barked. Immediately afterward, the vampires that had attacked Lucilius began to turn to ashes. At the last, one of the vampires managed to say and realize that the sacred rooster was not going to let them go from the beginning. After those words, there was nothing left of the vampires. Solaris looked at the place where the vampires disappeared and then at Herberg in surprise. In the end, the girl concluded that the vampires had turned to ashes when the rooster crowed. Lucilius again menacingly corrected Solaris, explaining that it was not just a rooster, but Herberg. Lack was also a little shocked, for Lucilius had said that Herberg's power was to divide worlds, and Lucilius explained that this was why this power was able to interrupt the transformation of the vampires. The young man assured that the transformation should not exist according to the power of the holy cockerel, so the vampires turned to ashes. Then Solaris asked Lucilius if he needed to hide from vampires with such power. Lucilius, however, explained that by its very nature, this power could only defeat a vampire at the moment of its transformation. But it still seemed amazing to Solaris, because it was a great technique if vampires had to flee. Lucilius agreed with what Solaris said, for Herberg is really amazing. In that case, Luck suggested that the guys should go back to the capital. After a while, the trio and Herberg were already in the capital. Walking through the busy streets, Lucilius was forced to cover his horns so as not to raise questions. Lack, on the contrary, cheered Lucilius up and, after patting him on the head, assured him that all was well. Along the way, the boys also ran into Shia, whom Lack had not expected to meet. The girl ran up to Lack and mentioned that she had been waiting for him. Lack waved Shia's hand in greeting and asked if she had already returned from her village, to which Shia replied that she had already dealt with everything. Solaris at this time looked at Shia with suspicion as she didn't know who it was, and Shia reached for Lack's ear and whispered that she urgently had to put something to the young man. Lack realized that it was something serious and suggested that Shia talk inside. The first thing Shia decided to do was to meet Solaris and Lucilius. The girl introduced herself as a vampire hunter and B-rank adventurer, and Lack told the guys how Shia had once helped him defeat a vampire lord. Lucilius marveled at such an accomplishment by Shia, and Solaris had a hard time believing it all. Solaris, on the other hand, introduced herself to Shia as Lack's apprentice. Lack was dumbfounded, for even he did not know that Solaris was his student. Looking at the two girls, Lack didn't understand what kind of atmosphere hung in this room. It was as if they were competing with each other. In the end, Lack eventually suggested that Shia talk in his room. At first, Solaris followed them, but when Shia entered Lack's room, Lack blocked Solaris' path and left her outside the door. First left alone with Shia, Lack noticed that the girl had returned rather quickly. The young man concluded that Shia's village was near the royal capital. Shia, on the other hand, explained that her home was a 3-hour walk from the capital. Shia also decided to apologize for such an urgency. The girl assured that she had something that she could only ask Lack about. Lack, on the other hand, assured that there was no problem with it. When Shia fell silent, Lack reiterated that there was no problem with it, even with the same face. Shia, on the other hand, didn't understand why Lack agreed. After all, she hadn't said anything yet. And Lack didn't care, because Shia needs his help, so he is willing to listen to anything. Then Shia realized that Lack is really an infinitely nice person. So, finally, the girl started her story. She started by saying that it seems that the vampires are planning something big, and it looks like it's being led by the vampire's High Lord. Those words had already alerted Lack. After realizing that in addition to the vampire lord, there was also a supreme vampire lord, Lack realized that it was too complicated. The Supreme Vampire Lord is a ruler of rulers who controls the vampire lords. It is a monster with power far greater than the junior ones. Shia said that her tribe called Lycan made great efforts to uncover and thwart the schemes of the vampires, but it was difficult for them to even approach the High Lord. Shia's father has not fully recovered yet, and it is hard for Shia to admit it. But when facing the tribe leaders, one should only take the path of brute force. From this point of view, Shia thinks that her tribe might be completely destroyed. Then Lack realized that Shia wanted him to help her, and Shia confessed that she really wants it, and the truth is that she needs to find something before the High Lord. Shia explained that this vampire is frantically looking for a certain chicken. Thus, Shia must protect the chicken until she meets the vampires. This is where Lack became thoughtful. He clearly understood which chicken Shia was talking about. At this moment, Shia looked at the pensive Lack and thought that he was thinking too much after what he had said. For example, why protect some chicken? Lack tried to explain that he wasn't thinking about that at all, but Shia stood her ground. Shia assured that she had heard that chicken could close interdimensional doors and also prevent vampires from reincarnating. This is where Lack finally became convinced that Shia was talking about Herberg. Lack tried to explain to Shia that he believed her and knew about it too, but Shia thought Lack just didn't believe her. After all, no matter which way you look at it, it's just a chicken. The girl just wouldn't let Lack say a word. She was trying to convince herself that the chicken could really have abilities, because Lack already knew that. Finally, Lack was able to speak to Shia so that she could hear him. The young man explained that he had met this chicken before. Finally, she was silent. At that moment, some sounds were heard outside the door to the room. Lack walked to the door and gestured for Shia to be quiet, after which, the young man quickly and abruptly opened the door, behind which stood Solaris. Since the girl was eavesdropping by leaning on the door, when Lack opened it, Solaris somersaulted into the room. Rising up, Solaris stroked the head she had hit, and Lucilius, who was also at the door, reproached Solaris for her act, for he had told her that it was not good to eavesdrop. Of course, Solaris began to assure her that Lack was mistaken, and that she had not been eavesdropping at all. Then Lack, who had said nothing at all about eavesdropping, asked what was he wrong about. To this question Solaris could not answer, for she realized that she had given herself up. Still unable to come up with an excuse for herself, the girl decided to simply apologize to the young man. Lack asked Solaris to apologize to Shia as well. Solaris turned to Shia with tears in her eyes and apologized. Shia, on the other hand, assured that everything would be alright only if Solaris did not tell anyone about what she had heard. Meanwhile, Lack asked Lucilius, who was still standing outside the door, to enter the room as well. Also, Lack introduced Lucilius to Shia since Shia didn't know his name yet. However, Lack didn't forget to introduce Herberg, the divine rooster that Shia and her tribe were looking for. Upon seeing the divine rooster, Shia was simply dumbfounded. Then a surprised scream echoed throughout the Goblin mansion. The girl couldn't believe that the rooster had already been found. She started looking at Herberg and asking all sorts of silly questions. Lack also added that he found the rooster after Solaris joined him. Lack told Shia that he had seen Herberg's powers with his own eyes. Thus, the vampires were immediately turned to ashes. After this confirmation from Lack, Shia realized that the legends were indeed true. And Shia kneeled before Herberg and said that it was a great honor to meet the divine rooster Herberg. In response, Herberg crowed. After the introduction, Lack clarified to Shia what their next goal was, since they already had the divine rooster. And, it turns out, the target now becomes the Supreme Lord. Then Lack asked Shia if she knew where this Supreme Lord was located. As it turned out, Shia only knew the approximate location. At that moment, Solaris's father, Goblin, returned to the mansion. He immediately heard extraneous shouts and asked the butler what kind of guests they had. Lack, without thinking long, decided to go and talk to Goblin, and asked the rest of the boys to stay in the room. Shia was very nervous at this time, because she knew that Goblin was the guild master. Goblin was very happy to see Lack, for he came home humble. It also came to Goblin's attention that Lack had helped his daughter out, for which he also thanked him. Lack, on the other hand, thought that he and Solaris had simply completed the task. But Goblin believed that Lack had grown when comparing his strength and Solaris' strength. Lack also thought that Solaris was a fine professional warrior, for despite her age she could do many things. Goblin took these words as praise for himself. At that moment, Solaris came out of Lack's room. Upon seeing his daughter, Goblin first congratulated her on completing her first task, and Solaris saw fit to apologize to her father, after which tears appeared in her eyes. Goblin was simply dumbfounded and did not understand why his daughter was crying. As it turned out, Solaris was sorry for being cold to her father and doing terrible things. Goblin, on the other hand, was very worried about his daughter at this time and tried to calm her down somehow. Then Lack realized that the Goblin he knew had a soft side that was showing around his daughter. Goblin then asked Solaris what she was so angry about. He assumed it was because he had become an adventurer and stood up to his daughter. But Solaris assured that this was not the case and she mistakenly thought that her father had an illegitimate child. On hearing such a statement, Goblin was taken aback and immediately declared that there was no way he could have had illegitimate children. With these words, he took a glass of water from the tray held by the butler. Solaris, on the other hand, admitted that she had jumped to conclusions and now knew that her father did not and had not had illegitimate children. The girl also admitted that she thought Lack was her younger brother. At this point, Goblin took a sip of water, but upon hearing these words from his daughter, had to spit out all the water out of exasperation. After that, Goblin clutched his face and hung his head. Solaris asked her father what had happened, and Goblin asked his daughter if she had pestered Lack with this. Solaris refused to give an answer to that question and turned away, and just started whistling as if nothing had happened. Goblin realized that his daughter was indeed bothering Laku with her speculations. For this he felt very ashamed. After that, Solaris decided to just leave, explaining that she wanted to tell the others that her father had returned. When Lack and Goblin were left alone, Goblin was even more embarrassed, and Lack had picked up on the fact that Solaris did say unnecessary things too often, though he didn't care much about it. For this, Goblin felt it necessary to apologize to his comrade. Goblin was even ready to fall at Luck's feet. He confessed that he had not at all expected his daughter to upset him so much. At that moment, for some reason, Lack remembered those moments with Goblin that had happened before. Once Goblin had mistaken a goat for a monster and a waiter for a robber. There were many such situations in which Goblin clearly showed his personality. It was only now that Lack realized that Goblin had a paternal aura about him. Even now, Goblin was planning to dissuade his daughter from seeking adventure, because on the other hand, she could have been tricked by some evil man. At this point, Lack stopped his companion and assured him that everything was fine, for he was looking out for Solaris and was ready to stop her if she became reckless. For this, Goblin tearfully thanked his close friend, of course, hugging him too tightly. And Luck, of course, did not like such a thing very much. At that moment, a joyful Solaris burst into the room and announced that she had brought everyone. But seeing her father and Luck hugging, the girl was obviously thinking the wrong thing. In her eyes, Goblin and Lack looked too close. Out of emotion, the girl asked the two companions to take their time and ran away herself, slamming the door behind her. Goblin as usual did not understand anything, unlike Lack, who understood what he and Goblin were now waiting for. The young man immediately rushed after Solaris to explain everything to her, for she had misunderstood everything. But the girl asserted that she was sorry to have disturbed her father and Lack. Lack, on the other hand, assured her that Solaris was simply mistaken, and Solaris stood her ground and assured that she would not say anything to anyone. After that, Solaris was given an hour-long educational session. Only then did Lack and Goblin finally get rid of their misunderstanding, and Solaris began to apologize on her knees. In the end, Lack suggested that we get back to the main topic. So, where do vampires congregate? Lack said that based on Shia's words, it could be assumed that the vampires were secretly ruled by a supreme lord. Hearing the mention of a high lord, Goblin was dumbfounded. He immediately realized that this whole situation could not be called a mere nuisance. In any case, Luck planned to leave Herberg as an ace up his sleeve, hitting the vampire headquarters and the High Lord in the process. Then Shia suggested that Herberg could help them in the battle since he was very strong. But Lack didn't think that idea was a good one, because that way the guys would have to fight and protect Herberg at the same time. Suddenly, Shia remembered that she forgot to mention that if the High Lord drank the blood of the divine rooster, a curse would immediately fall, and the interdimensional gate would open. Lack and Goblin were perplexed by such a statement. Lucilius had a violent reaction, as he was the most worried about his rooster. Even Herberg himself clucked indignantly at that moment. Lack realized that Lucilius was not aware of this fact at all. As Shia had told him, the curse was born from the desecration of life. More importantly, with the most sacred desecrated item, the strongest curse could be created. When it comes to selling curses, killing humans is dirtier than killing mice, and killing gods is dirtier than killing humans. Here Lack realized that they had less and less reason to move forward if that was really how things were. Goblin agreed with his comrade. Then Lack suggested putting a barrier around the estate to update the defenses. Goblin realized that Lack could do that, but he had another idea. He just didn't understand why Lack couldn't trust Eric. Lack was a little dumbfounded, for in this way Goblin is referring to the royal palace. Goblin, on the other hand, thought that if it was actually a divine chicken, then entrusting its protection to the royal family was perfectly permissible. Solaris also liked her father's idea, because the royal palace should really be safe. That's why the boys amicably decided to go to the royal palace right now. After a while, they were already wandering through the spacious corridors of the palace. A servant led the boys into one room where he asked them to wait. They entered and sat down peacefully on a sofa. The servant girl also brought cups of tea for the heroes to help themselves. Shia sincerely thanked the maid, who had a strange change in her face when she saw Hertzberg. At this moment, Lack remarked that the chamberlain who had brought them here was very young. Goblin agreed with his comrade and explained that it was because Eric was raising a bunch of disciples. Lack didn't understand at first which apprentices they were talking about. Then Goblin began to list them and at the same time curl his fingers on his hands. Apprentices of knights, apprentices of chamberlains, apprentices of cooks. Thus we get about 2,000 apprentices in various professions, and that's just here in the royal palace. Such a number seemed too large to Luck, but Goblin assured him that it was a welfare policy and one could not argue here. After all, there are second and third sons of impoverished nobles, sons of knights who lost in a battle with the ruler of Madzin in the past, and if they are trained in the royal palace, they can quickly find a job. After listening to Goblin, Lack realized that Eric was still an excellent king. Besides, his motto goes like this: education enriches the country. At that moment, Eric entered the room with his two daughters. The first thing Eric said about hearing how Luck quickly defeated the vampire lord. Also, Eric remarked that this was the first time Lack was meeting his daughters. That's why the girls decided to introduce themselves and get to know each other. As it turns out, Eric's older daughter's name is Charlotte and his younger daughter's name is Mariah. They were very happy to meet Lack. Luck also introduced himself, calling himself an old man, a friend of their father, Luck. The joyful girls then said that they were honored to meet the great sage, Archduke Franzen. At that moment the youngest Maria took out a book and, raising it above her head, shouted joyfully, "It's the hero Luck." After looking at the book, Lack realized that the book was called The Great Adventures of Hero Lack. To see such a thing Luck obviously did not expect, so he was in a stupor. Eric, however, explained to Luck that his youngest daughter liked heroic stories about Luck. That is why Eric would like Luck to sign this picture book later. Luck was dumbfounded, for not only was this book about him, but it was also a picture book. Shia realized that Lack knew nothing about it and decided to explain that all the children in this country grow up on stories about Lack. To them, Lack is the hero that every child would like to be. But Lack thought all this crap was just brainwashing. At this point, Lucilius noticed that Herberg also liked the picture book about Luck. Realizing that even God watches picture books with them, Luck was just dumbfounded. At that moment, Mary walked over to Herberg and took him from Lucilius's arms into her arms. The delighted girl liked the beautiful rooster very much. Goblin on the other hand decided to ask Solaris to go and play with Princess Charlotte and Princess Maria in the other room. The girls agreed and took Herberg with them. Looking at the girls leaving, accompanied by the maid, the boys realized that the ladies had already become friends. Goblin, on the other hand, said that Solaris had always wanted a little sister, so she often came to the royal palace to play. At this moment, Eric apologized to Luck. He realized that the matter was urgent, but his daughters wanted to see Lack no matter what. The fact was that thanks to Lack's own dispersal of Madsen's army 10 years ago, Eric had been awarded 2 flowers of life. Now Eric's happiness is encapsulated in Charlotte and Maria, and it was Luck who gave this happiness to Eric. Eric believed that it was not only him, but all the people of this country on this continent who had been given this happiness by Luck. All of them would like to pass on these feelings to Luck by all means. Luck was very pleased to hear these words, but he still considered the picture book to be already overdone. At this time, the maid who had been eyeing Herberg so much had already taken the girls to another room. The girls entered and thanked the maid named Rona for doing so. Rona, on the other hand, planned to leave to prepare sweets for the girls. At this time, the boys had already told Eric the whole situation. Eric realized that the recent activity of the vampires was planned by them. And Lack also added that one way or another, the blood of the divine rooster would cause an immediate accumulation of curse. Therefore, the rooster must be protected at all costs. Eric agreed to this venture and promised to take responsibility and provide protection for the divine rooster and Lucilius. Hearing these words, Lucilius was overjoyed, for now there would be no need to worry. At this moment, Goblin felt it necessary to ask Lack what strategy he was going to use in the fight against the High Lord. Lack replied that he was currently thinking of joining Shia and the hunters from the Beastmen tribe. Such a beginning pleased both Eric and Goblin. Then Lack added that he was also planning to rush to attack the Supreme Vampire Lord. This statement discouraged Eric and Goblin. This strategy seemed a little ill-conceived to Goblin, but Luck was quick to stop the grumbling Goblin and make him think. Lack assured him that he would first begin to distract the crowds of lords and then a gap would form. A group of beastmen would strike the High Lord. Goblin, on the other hand, remarked that if he had to choose, he would choose the opposite for those roles. That was something Lack didn't expect to hear. Lack felt that going up against a bunch of lords would be much more painful, even though the highest lord was stronger than the other lords. Shia admitted that Lack was telling the truth, but the fact was that even if the beastmen couldn't defeat the lords, they were capable of blocking the lord's path. But Lack in the vampire lands, the girl thought Lack was the only one who could finish off the High Lord. Here Lack hesitated for a moment. Goblin, on the other hand, had picked up on the fact that there was a chance that the clash would result in many casualties on the part of the Beastmen tribe. That was why the man wanted to know if Shia was sure that she really wanted it. But Shia assured that she wanted it with all her heart, because it was 100 times better than letting the High Lord escape. At this time, Goblin saw fit to apologize to Lack, for he would like to request reinforcements from the Adventurers Guild. But the fact is that vampires charm humans, so it won't work. Goblin didn't know if the Beastmen tribe was capable of resisting the vampire forces, but he can't just stand by and watch his friends being killed one by one. Shia then explained that those who allow their blood to be drunk and then turn into a vampire have enhanced physical abilities, but it is possible to distinguish such from the Beastmen. On the other hand, although enchanted humans are endowed with the same abilities, it is simply impossible to distinguish them. At this time, Rona, who had escorted the girls and Herberg into the room, tied the handles of the same door with a strong rope so that the girls could not escape. Maria, who was inside the room, quickly noticed that the door would not open. Solaris realized that something was amiss and ordered Charlotte and Maria to stand behind her back. Everyone was startled, including Herberg. Solaris at this time found a trident-like attribute in the room and prepared to fight. At that moment, the monsters in the room began to manifest. Thus, in just a couple of seconds, 3 terrifying monsters appeared in front of the 3 defenseless girls. Solaris recognized these monsters. They were leeches, but the girl couldn't get her head around how these things were able to get inside the royal palace. Lich Kings are wizards or priests of the highest rank who were forcibly turned into undead for all time after death. Lich Kings are immortality kings, highly intelligent and able to use magic monsters. At this moment, Solaris greatly regretted not bringing her sword with her. Her head was now filled with only one big question: will I be able to defeat them? In any case, the girl realized that she had to do her best. After all, she was standing in defense of the princesses. Running the sharp end of the candle stand across the floor, Solaris thus made a line. The girl felt that this line should give her confidence. Solaris did not want her enemies to take even a step beyond this line. Mentally, she was determined that the enemy would not pass and she would definitely protect the divine rooster and the princesses until the very end. At that moment, one of the licks started attacking Solaris. To attack the girl, he used his magic power. Solaris, however, was not confused. She knew that if you could channel the magical power of a spell through a weapon, she could reflect it back. That was why it was not difficult for the girl to repel the lick's attack by channeling it back. Even though there were 3 opponents, Solaris did not despair. The girl was determined to prove that she could handle these troubles. And when the 3 licks attacked Solaris at the same time, the girl was not confused and repelled all of their magical attacks while scrolling her weapon in her hands. The licks continued to advance, but Solaris was good at repelling all the attacks. At some point in the same room there was an explosion, which with its shockwave even shattered the glass in the room. The knights noticed this explosion and panicked. And the reason for the explosion was the magical arrows. Hundreds of arrows. Seeing them, Solaris was dumbfounded. She just looked at the leeches attacking her with those arrows and couldn't do anything about it. That's when the explosion occurred. But Solaris survived, because Lack came to her defense in time and protected the girl, using a magical barrier. The first thing Lack did was to praise Solaris for a good job. The young man expected nothing less from his apprentice. Now it was time for Lack himself, Solaris's teacher, to deal with it. Let's go back a few minutes earlier. The conversation between Shia, Goblin, Eric, and Lack continued. Goblin explained to his comrades that the main problems in this whole vampire situation are becoming the vampire's abilities to charm and manipulate. This leads to being attacked by people who not long ago were your comrades. Of course, this is not a problem for Goblin and Eric since they have a high resistance to mental disorders. But recruiting regular soldiers or adventurers is something they simply cannot do. That's why Goblin was forced to apologize to Shia since he can't help her with this matter. Shia, on the other hand, tried to explain to Goblin that abilities such as charming and manipulation don't work on beastmen. In view of this, Shia hoped that Goblin would allow her and her tribe to fight. At this moment, Lack sensed that there was an enemy in the palace. As he quickly scrambled from his seat, a perplexed Goblin asked what was wrong. Lack quickly explained that there was an enemy in the palace and rushed to help in a shortcut. The young man used magic arrows to break a window and jump out of it. Then, while standing on a magical support, the young man saw and heard a large explosion a floor below. Without thinking long, the boy realized that the danger was there. And, as the leeches were already aiming their arrows at Solaris, Lack appeared. As mentioned earlier, the young man protected Solaris by using a magical barrier and also praised her for doing a good job. At that moment, Solaris was overjoyed to see Lack. Then he became her savior. The leeches at this time also did not retreat. They continued to attack Lack and Solaris. But for Lack, their attacks were too slow. The young man quickly imprisoned the licks in a sphere from which they could not escape. Then now, inside the sphere, the pressure, temperature, and density would build up infernally fast, and the licks would simply burn to death. Then, using a magic called implosion, Lack overpowered the licks by burning them to the ground. Seeing that there was little left of the licks, Solaris was simply stunned. From the shock that came, the girl couldn't utter a single word. Before her eyes, the 3 licks were destroyed in the blink of an eye. It was then that Solaris realized how powerful the legendary Great Sage, Lack Franzen, was. At that moment, the vampires appeared in the room from nowhere. They were bewildered, for they did not understand what had happened to their lick. To remain unnoticed, Lack and Solaris hid behind the bed and began to watch the vampires from the shadows. As it turned out, the vampires had sent the lichs forward. But the lichs weren't here at the moment, so they were confused. Eventually, looking through the broken glass, the vampires thought that the licks had just left. Then they concluded that they couldn't rely on other people's rotting brains. Looking at these vampires, Lack concluded that they were of the lower vampire race. In that case, the guy decided to pull something off using Lucilius illusion magic. Then Lack pretended to be the 8th Lord Vampire using illusion magic, and then went out to those vampires who were standing in the room in utter bewilderment. Upon seeing the so-called 8th Lord Vampire, which was actually Lack, the vampires were aroused. First, pretending to be the 8th Lord Vampire, Lack asked the lower vampires what they were doing here. The vampires, however, appeared before Lack on their knees and replied that they had come here on the orders of the 6th Lord Vampire. It was then that Lack realized that he had managed to fool the inferior vampires despite the fact that only inferior vampires could pass through the castle's barrier. If one recalled the ranks of the vampire lords, a 10 lower number meant higher status. Then Lack asked the vampires why they had come to this place, to which they replied that they were here to capture the divine chicken. Hearing such a statement, Lack was dumbfounded. He replied that he had not heard of this at all and assured that these vampires were standing in the way of accomplishing an important mission given to him by the High Lord. To which the inferior vampires replied that the High Lord had directly ordered their 6th Lord to which was why they were here. The vampires also said that as far as they knew, there were many people serving the Sixth Lord, even those who had infiltrated the royal palace. Hearing those words, Solaris, who was hiding behind the bed, was dumbfounded. The girl realized that the maid named Rona was also serving the Sixth Lord, so she locked them in that room. Then Lack, in order to keep the conversation going with the vampires and not arouse suspicion, admitted that they might have misunderstandings in this matter. The vampires in turn brought their regrets to Lack. At that moment, Lack's gaze fell on the magic circle that the vampires had apparently brought with them. Lack then stated that it would be best if he personally had a word with the Sixth Lord. That was why he asked the inferior vampires if he could reach the Sixth Lord with this magic circle. The inferior vampires, on the other hand, replied that he would indeed be able to reach the Sixth Lord with ease with its help. At that moment, the door to the room breaks with the help of someone's foot. The vampires were puzzled and didn't realize what was happening. As it turned out, Goblin burst into the room with Lack's sword in his hands. Without thinking, he threw the sword to Lack. Lack caught his sword and began to bear the blade. At this point, the vampires began to suspect something, but it was too late. Lack declared that their end had come. Immediately after these words, the young man unsheathed his sword and cut the vampires in two. When the vampires were defeated, Lack resumed his former appearance. The frightened Charlotte and Mary immediately ran to embrace their father. And Goblin first went to Lack and asked how those vampires had gotten into the palace, for the royal palace was protected by magic. Lack explained that it was absolutely impossible to bring a magic circle here. However, a completed teleportation magic circle could be brought here. With those words, Lack pointed to the very tray with the magic circle, after which he asked Solaris if this silver tray had always been here. Solaris explained that this tray had only recently been brought here by a servant girl named Rona along with some sweets. Then Lack explained to everyone that it was actually a magic item disguised as a silver tray that allowed them to use teleportation magic. That was why Lack concluded that they immediately needed to capture this maid. Before the young man could finish speaking, Solaris snapped and rushed out to find the maid. Lack tried to stop the girl, but Solaris assured him that she was the only one who knew Rona by sight. Then Lack decided to send Shia along with the restless Solaris, because there was a chance that Solaris would be subdued or charmed. Shia understood everything and immediately rushed after Solaris. Goblin, on the other hand, was asked by Lack to protect Herberg and Lucilius, for the castle must surely be full of the Lord's petty bipeds. Goblin then asked Lack what he was going to do, to which Lack said with a smile on his face that he was going to kill the boss of these vampires, the so-called Sixth Lord. Before Goblin could even blink an eye, Lack had already dived into the magical teleportation circle that Rona had brought. A couple of moments later, Lack was already in a dark place he was unfamiliar with. No sooner had the young man recovered from the displacement than a vampire appeared behind him and asked Lack who he was. With that question, the vampire reached for Lack's hand. Lack, however, managed to use illusion magic and, reincarnating again as the Eighth Lord Vampire, grabbed the stranger vampire's hand, while asking him to step back. Seeing the Eighth Lord Vampire, the blonde-haired vampire immediately perked up. As it turned out, he had heard that the Eighth Vampire had been destroyed by the Beastmen, so he was glad to see his kind in good health. Lack, however, pretended not to like these words of the vampire, and asked him if he was tired of living. The agitated vampire in turn offered his sincere regrets to Lack and asked him to humbly forgive him. After Lack said he forgave him, the vampire asked why the Eighth Lord Vampire had teleported here. To which Lack replied that he met some minions when he infiltrated the royal palace on a secret mission. Lack also assured that he had received a message from the High Lord and then asked if the Sixth Lord was here. The vampire, however, replied that the Sixth Lord was indeed here. Without thinking long, the vampire decided to escort Lack to that very Sixth Vampire. As he turned away, Lack allowed himself to rejoice, for he had a chance to destroy the Sixth Vampire. The blonde vampire sensed the suspicious activity behind him and turned to look at Lack. Lack, however, had time to change his face and with a disgruntled look asked the vampire to take him away. Lack then headed down the long dark corridor following the vampire. As they began to climb the stairs, Lack asked if this place was new, to which the vampire replied that it was indeed a citadel that the Sixth Lord had ordered the peasants to build. Lack decided to find out more about some peasants, so he asked the vampire about it. The vampire told Lack that the Sixth Lord had attacked the nearest village and subjugated the surviving peasants. After all, subjugated people make an excellent labor force, and those who didn't join the Sixth Lord, the vampires simply made them their food. Those words the vampire said with a chuckle, and Lack was simply horrified as he listened to these stories. At some point, Lack stopped the vampire and told him that he didn't need to show him the way anymore. Also, the young man stopped using illusion magic and showed his real identity. When the vampire turned around, he saw a man standing in front of him. But it was too late. In an instant, Lak managed to cut the vampire in two with his sword, which previously belonged to the demon lord. Immediately afterward, the vampire simply turned into ashes. As the vampire's ashes dissipated, Lak raised his gaze. His eyes were filled with confidence and hatred. After a while, the young man managed to reach the lair of the sixth vampire lord, who at this time was sitting peacefully on his throne surrounded by other vampires. Lak immediately destroyed a couple of vampires who were blocking his path. The remaining two who remained in the room asked Lak who he was, but no sooner had they come to their senses than magical arrows rained down on them from behind. Surprisingly, it was the work of the sixth lord vampire. The two vampires turned to ashes, never realizing why their lord had put them to death. When the smoke cleared, Lak showed up. He was quite surprised that the sixth lord had consumed his allies with a single attack. But the young man didn't expect anything less from the evil boss. At this moment, the sixth vampire began to approach Lak, calling the guy a cursed monster. Luck, however, responded by asking the vampire to speak for himself and then pounced on him. The vampire managed to fend off Lak's attack by covering his body with his own sword. But by force, Lak still pounced on the vampire, leaving a sword cut on his pale, skinny face at the corner of his mouth. After that, the two opponents' swords once again crossed. With a smile, Lak remarked how good the sixth lord's sword was after all. Therefore, without any hesitation, the young man asked the vampire to give him this sword. Of course, the vampire did not agree to such a venture and only began to prepare to attack Lak with his magic. But before the vampire could think of anything else, he was hit in the face with a kick. Lak's stretching was amazing. The young man effortlessly managed to lift his leg high and kick the vampire right in the face. While the vampire was spitting blood from his leg, Lak had already cut off one of his sword-holding hands. But Lak did not stop at the arm. With a full swing of his sword, Lak simply split the vampire's torso in two, making a horizontal sword movement. While still in his right mind, the vampire asked Lak who he was. Lak replied with his real name and said that he was just an F-rank adventurer. It was then that the vampire realized that things were not going well for his ally, for he had taken retribution from Lak's swift counterattack, so the vampire attack must obviously fail. Lak in turn put his sword to the vampire's nose and ordered him to tell how he had led his minions into the royal palace. In response, the vampire merely smiled and said whether Lak thought he would answer him directly. But Lak assured him that that was exactly what he thought. With those words, he plunged his sword into the vampire's head. The vampire lastly asked Lak to try to live in health and peace until that day came. The vampire wanted Lak to enjoy his short, miserable life until the day came when the vampire lord would kill him. After those words, the vampire finally turned to dust. All that was left of him was the cursed medallion. Without thinking, Lak chopped the medallion into two pieces with his sword, imprisoning all the vampire's power in the weapon. A moment later, Lak found himself in total darkness. It was as if he were in another dimension. A moment later, Lak heard human voices. They were screaming for help. "No, I don't want to die. Please save me. It hurts. It hurts. Let me go. Mommy, mommy, save me. Save me." Then Lak let go of his sword, coming back to reality and dragging in all those horrible memories of the Lord. Turning his head, the young man saw the door from which those very childish voices were coming. Upon opening this door, Lak found only the skeletons that remained of the children who had previously sat in this room on chains. Walking over to the bones, Lak placed his hand on one of the skulls and apologized to them for not being able to save everyone. Lak realized that these children were scared and in pain to the point of insanity. He simply could not remain indifferent, so he felt it necessary to apologize. But then Lak had definitely decided something for himself. He would avenge all those dead children. At this time, the bat-like monsters that were in the Sixth Lord's lair noticed the invasion and decided to rush into attack. There were so many of them that it would have been almost impossible to count. Lak, despite the number of creatures, rushed into the attack. He chopped each monster in half with ease, quickly moving on. The vampires and monsters died one after another, while Luck as usual didn't have a scratch on him. Eventually, the young man managed to kill all the creatures in the den. Wandering through the lair and leaving footprints in the ashes left by the vampires, Lak walked on. The young man decided to go up to the roof to see the surroundings. Looking around, Lak noticed that there was indeed a village nearby. But the thing is, there is no way to save a man who has been subjugated and sucked dry of all his blood. If he loses his lord, he simply turns to dust. That was why there were no living people left in the very village nearby. After realizing this, Lak decided to return to the capital. That night, there was a full moon. The bats did not hide and fluttered quietly under the light of the moon. And in the royal palace, despite the late hour, no one slept. The guards and Golan and Eric waited impatiently for Lack's return, peering diligently into the darkness. Finally, a smile appeared on their faces, and that meant that luck had returned. The first thing Lack told them was that he had dealt with all the nauseating vampires in that place, and he had also spilled out of his sack what was left of the monsters he had destroyed. Golan thanked Lack for his work. Lack, in turn, added guiltily that unfortunately all the nearby villages had been completely destroyed. The young man had only himself to blame for all of this, because he could have revealed the vampire's plan earlier. But Golan tried to remind Luck that he was still 10 days away from this world, and the only one who should be held responsible for this was the Grandmaster. That is, Golan himself. Also, Golan promised the young man to send men to those villages, for the dead deserved a decent funeral. At that moment, Lack's gaze fell for the servant girl Rona. The young man didn't know what kind of girl she was, so he asked, for Rona was sitting tied up. Solaris explained to Lack that this maid's name was Rona and she was enchanted. Lack was glad to hear that it was only a charm, for in this way she could still be cured. It was also a great relief for Solaris. Eric, on the other hand, believed that it was all thanks to Lack defeating that lord. Thus, 5 people in the castle were turned into ashes and another 30 were rendered unconscious. That was why Eric felt that they could no longer call the royal palace a safe place for the divine rooster Herberg if these subordinate and enchanted people were even here. Then Lack made up his mind. He declared that he would go with Herberg to the High Lord and kill him. Of course, Lack was willing to lay down his life in defense of the divine rooster. After saying that, Eric and Golan looked at each other and a smile shone on their faces. Eric thought this decision of Lack's was the best choice, and Golan said that plus it would be fine if he and Eric went with Lack. Hearing that Golan and Eric were also going to go to battle with the High Lord, Lack was dumbfounded. Golan, on the other hand, felt that they simply had no right to fail this mission. Because of that, a group of 3 heroes would be much more reliable. Lack, of course, agreed with his comrades, but had to remind them that one of them was a Grand Master and the other was a king at all. But Golan and Eric assured with one voice that they were on full alert. At that moment, Shia was over the moon, for she had never imagined that the day would come when she would be able to see with her own eyes the rebirth of the legendary group. In the meantime, a meeting had begun in the cathedral. It's worth mentioning that this cathedral belongs to the Order of Sacred Magic. The first thing the Order of Sacred Magic did was to sincerely apologize to their queen who had to go to this place. The queen, however, in response only asked a girl named Arkasre to explain the entire situation. Arkasre then asked Queen Levi Leonard Ardenes of the Kingdom of Mendelibar to follow her. The queen was taken to a room where a detailed map of the entire kingdom was located. Arkasre then reported that although the barrier of the royal capital is serviceable, but vibrations have been noticed. Also, in any case, there was a more pressing problem. To understand this problem, the queen asked for a pouch that contained some kind of magic dust. Without thinking long, Levi scattered the magic dust over the layout of the entire kingdom. At that moment, everyone saw where the source of the problems really was. The members of the Order of Sacred Magic were dumbfounded, but they expected nothing less from their queen. The queen then told them that a horse rider sent by the king had recently arrived. The rider stated that they wanted to strike a blow at the High Lord. Then everyone concluded that the High Lord was hiding somewhere in the mountains, because the magic dust that the queen had scattered had accumulated there. After a couple of minutes, the message to the king from the order that the High Lord was somewhere in the mountains had already been sent. The queen in turn asked the Arkasria to provide her with as many class of priests as she could. Levi planned to reinforce the barrier of this mountain range and restrict the High Lord's movements. This was when Arkasre realized with horror that the queen was personally going to go to the High Lord's lair. The queen, however, really felt it was her duty, for the king himself had gone there. In that case, Arkasre decided to immediately gather all the class priests for the queen. She and another dark-haired girl quickly rushed down the corridor. Arkasre was very excited, for the matter was becoming serious. It was said that Her Majesty the Queen's sacred magic was the most powerful in the history of the Order of Sacred Magic. That was why Arkasre felt that there was nothing more glorious than standing shoulder to shoulder with such an entity, and uniting sacred prayers with her. Levi was not part of the group that enslaved the ruler of Madzin as she was pregnant, but it is said that due to Her Majesty the Queen's involvement, the great sage Lack was able to return. Surprisingly, right at that moment, Lack sneezed. Golan, sitting on a horse nearby, was very puzzled by his comrade's sneeze. He thought that Lack had caught a cold because he must have been sleeping on his stomach. At this point, Lack thought again that Golan was his mother. He assured the comrade that everything was fine. It was just a little chilly outside. Then Goblin remarked that if Levi were here, she would cure Lack in no time. That's when it hit Lack. He remembered that he had never seen Queen Levi before. Eric, however, explained that they had left Levi in charge of the Order of Sacred Magic. Eric assured that the Queen also wanted to see Luck, but she was now in the cathedral. At this point, a surprised Shia asked Eric with interest if he was talking about Her Majesty to the Queen, to which Eric replied that he was indeed talking about the Queen. She was originally the healer of a group that included Eric, Goblin, and Lack. Suddenly, Lack asked Eric if Levi would have been able to prevent the Lesser from attacking if she had been in the palace at that time. Eric, on the other hand, believed that his wife would indeed have been able to do so, and since she was not present, the monsters simply had a greater advantage. Eric realized that he could only hope that the vampires would no longer attack the royal palace. The king felt that he could trust the palace to Solaris and the others, and he and his companions would be better off focusing on the High Lord for now. Lack and Goblin in turn supported Eric, for they thought the same thing.